on time because we know people have very busy schedules and want to appreciate everybody who has made it to this meeting for honoring the invitation and the meeting. My name is Fred Muhumza. I'm part of the academia and thereafter part of civil society, but also somewhere I have big roots or deep roots within the government circles. I'm a Ugandan, so just in case, therefore, which that makes me an East African. Right Honorable First Deputy Prime Minister, we want to once again welcome you, and it's not I'm not fit to really do that entirely. I can only do that to an extent. I will invite the right people who are the organizers to do that. But just briefly, the objectives of this dialogue are clearly indicated on the papers that have been given to us. One is to understand the current context of domestic resource mobilization or revenue and the role of Yala in the harmonization and enforcing of policies and laws in the East African region, but also to present the CSO position papers on how to improve domestic resource mobilization through tax harmonization and prudent debt management in the region, but also develop a roadmap for CSO engagement with MIACA and Yala on fiscal processes in the region. If we can achieve those objectives in the next 5 minutes, the meeting will end. But I'm sure we want to first have an engagement. And I am going to invite the welcome remarks from Madame Jane Nalunga, the Executive Director, Siatini, Uganda. You have just about 5 minutes to do that. And we request that as you finish, you invite the Right Honorable First Deputy Prime Minister to come and give us her remarks as well. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Right Honorable First Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of ES Affairs, Rebecca Ntwawula Kadaga, other honorable ministers here, honorable members of Parliament, both of Yala and Uganda, development partners, colleagues from the private sector, civil society, academia, and the media. On behalf of the organizers of this meeting, I would like to welcome you all to this regional dialogue on domestic resource mobilization in the East African community. This dialogue comes at an opportune time when all our governments in the region and also in the entire Africa are grappling with ways of how to mobilize resources to provide social services, infrastructure, and to grow back the economy which has been hit hard by the COVID pandemic. As we all know, domestic resources are the most sustainable way of financing development. But our domestic resource mobilization has been reducing due to a number of challenges, but also due to the COVID pandemic. And what governments are now doing because of that contraction in domestic resource mobilization is to look outwards to external sources like loans, like grants and aid, and sometimes also by imposing regressive taxes. It's important that as a region, as an East African region, we explore extensively on how to mobilize more resources, but equitably and fairly. This dialogue, Honorable Prime Minister, is a step in this direction by discussing some of the critical issues that impact on domestic resource mobilization in the region. These include tax harmonization, issues around prudent debt management, and the maximization of benefits from our resources, most especially the minerals, through the domestication of the Africa Mining Vision and the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, EITI. Regarding these three critical issues, Right Honourable, a number of commitments have been done, and progress has been done also, has been made in regard to addressing these issues. However, gaps also exist, and that's why we are here. Just as an example, for example, the ESC members, some of them are yet to ratify the ESC double taxation agreement, which has been on the table for the last 11 years. And regarding that debt issue, a number of countries have also breached the debt threshold as agreed upon by the macroeconomic convergence criteria. Under the extractive sector, there is the issue of the need to domesticate the AMV and also conclude the ESC Mining Bill 2017. The ESC Investment Model Treaty is also on the table. So there are a number of issues, Honourable, Right Honourable Prime Minister, which need to be addressed if we are to embark on ensuring that we have adequate resources generated internally to be able to ensure a fair and green post-COVID recovery. There are other issues, Honourable, Right Honourable Prime Minister, which are impacting on domestic resource mobilization in the region, which needs also urgent attention. These include, for example, border closures, the trade wars within the region. I know, Right Honourable, these are issues you have been working on and which we need to work on further, because we need a vibrant economy as a region and as a continent. Right Honourable Prime Minister, regional integration is the way to go, because we need to negotiate as a region bigger markets. Today we are negotiating the Continental Free Trade Area, but we need to enter such markets as a region if we are to get out value. We need also to position ourselves in the ever-changing dynamic global economy. And as a country, as Uganda, we can't do it alone, but we can do it as a region. So, Honourable, Right Honourable Prime Minister, the issue of putting right the regional economic integration is very, very important. Allow me to appreciate government and other MDAs for the continued cooperation and for the listening ear and providing space for non-state actors to engage with government. For example, Right Honourable Prime Minister, this dialogue was organized together with Honourable Jojo Dongo of Yala, because he's the coordinator of the Uganda Yala chapter, and we really appreciate that cooperation. We have also worked closely with your ministry, Mieka, in organizing this meeting, and we have also been working closely with the Ministry of Finance, URA, and all other MDAs, and we appreciate because this is the way to go if we are to build a strong economy and a strong country. I want to thank you once again, Right Honourable Prime Minister, for taking time off to come to be with us in this very important meeting. We don't take that for granted, but we also know that you hold dear the issues of regional integration on your heart. I want to thank all of you here for coming, and I hope we have a fruitful deliberation to ensure that our region moves as a strong entity. Thank you so much. I would like to request Honorable Jojo Dongo to come and invite the Right Honorable Prime Minister and Minister of ES Affairs to come and address us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jen. The Right Honorable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for ESC, Dr. Rebecca Alitwala Kadaga. Honorable colleagues, members of Parliament, both National Parliament and the East African Parliament, members of civil society, I take this singular honor to invite the Right Honorable Prime Minister to address. Thank you.
Mesdames et messieurs, bonjour. Habari za asubuhi. Good morning. Thought I should greet you in the languages of this East African community. Honor members of the Yala and the Uganda National Assembly, officials from the different government departments, the resident representative of the IMF in Uganda, other development partners, members of civil society, our host Siatini, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the government and my ministry, I want to take this opportunity, first of all, to welcome you and to thank you very much for organizing this strategic dialogue on enhancing economic domestic revenue mobilization in the East African community. I want to thank all those who have been able to come to attend so that we can speak together, think together, and plan together, and improve our resource mobilization. Our ministry's mandate is to steer Uganda's regional integration agenda in accordance with the Treaty for East African Community, to drive the region into socio-economic transformation, prosperity, and sustainable development. We are 6 member states. We hope that by the middle of this year, we shall have another 7th member, the Democratic Republic of Congo, which will create a very, very big trading opportunity, because it will bring together, in addition to our population, we shall have another 89 million people, which I think is a plus for the region. Already, we are engaged in infrastructure projects, making it possible to link Uganda and other East African countries to the DRC. We are looking at a complete road network of 223 kilometers. These projects were subject of an intergovernment agreement signed on 27th May 2021. I'm delighted that this discussion is coming at a time when the Council of Ministers is engaged in discussions about how to raise the annual subscription, and this is welcome in the context of the greater broader concept of funding for the East African community for development and economic, socio-economic progress within the region. Our NRM government and our President, Mr. Museveni, believes in regional integration and the East African community. That's why Uganda has been very instrumental in supporting various initiatives aimed at peace building and improving the well-being of people in socio-economic spheres so that the AEC is more vibrant. The community has made significant strides in implementing the key pillars of integration. First, with the customs union. It may not be working too well, but yes, we have the customs union. We have the common market. Mr. Alunga was talking about the border closures. These are breaches of the common market protocol. And I think many of our states are guilty of breaching these protocols. But we shall work together to ensure that ultimately we abide by what we agreed. We are in the initial steps of the monetary union, and later there will be a political federation. But for now, we are focusing on the monetary union, and we look forward to the single currency, which we expect by 2023. Therefore, this debate will also inform the policy on taxation and others to support the monetary union. I hope that the East African community will embrace the opportunities provided by these protocols as we deepen the integration. These achievements cannot be ignored. However, as has already been stated, domestic resource mobilization remains one of the most important policy challenges that partner states face in the East African region. The role of domestic resource mobilization has become important. This is because pursuing the SDGs and Agenda 2063 requires substantive resources. Yet this comes at a time when the global development finance landscape is changing fundamentally. But Africa and East Africa are not poor. We are resource rich, and I hope that sooner rather than later, we shall be able to use those resources which are in vast abundance in this region to support our development programs and improve the lives of our people. Despite notable progress in terms of strengthening the mobilization and effective use of domestic resources, there remain loopholes that continue to limit revenue generation. Many states are struggling to collect sufficient revenue, often failing to reach at least 15% of GDP in taxes. Debt to GDP ratio are increasing, surpassing the threshold under the East African Monetary Union Convergence criteria. As far as the debt is concerned, there are rising debt levels. The cost of debt servicing has increased throughout the African continent. The increased debt burden have affected government's ability to stimulate economic growth, including exports, imposing pressure on foreign reserves and budget resources that leads to a deterioration in the ability to deliver critical services, which is likely that the trend could lead countries to significant debt service costs in the future. Let me thank Siatini, the organizers, not only for this, but I know that they're engaged in many areas that touch the community. I want to thank you for organizing this dialogue and give us a platform to share stakeholders' views as we discuss this important subject. The role of the East African Legislative Assembly in enhancing tax harmonization and prudent debt management in the AEC region cannot be overemphasized. The role of the members of parliament of Uganda, who will soon be dealing with issues of the taxation and revenue bills. This is an important debate for you. The voice of civil society is critical in strengthening the AEC regional integration and building synergies with CSOs such as this is important for the region. As I said, Siatini has been engaged in various tireless initiatives towards shaping trade, fiscal, and investment-related issues, making regional integration work for all people across the East African community. I profoundly congratulate Siatini upon receiving the Uganda Revenue Authority Commissioner General's Strategic Professional Body Award, Financial Year 2020-2021. This was given to them in recognition of the contribution towards supporting revenue administration and policy formulation in Uganda. I welcome you all to this dialogue and wish you fruitful deliberations. I look forward to hearing the outcome, and I declare this meeting open. May God bless you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, First Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for East African Community Affairs, Right Honorable Rebecca Litwara-Kadaga, for those remarks. We really cherish your input and guidance at that strategic and political level, and for tasking your colleagues, the honorable members of Parliament. We do recognize your busy schedule, and at this point we want to be ready to let you go anytime, but not before we take the record on camera. So let me invite the photographers, please. Let's have a few people join the Right Honorable First Deputy Prime Minister for a photo session, and of course Yatini. We think we need to stand, I don't know which place is the right one for the record. Right in front here will do for us. Please put those on the table above there, right there. Honorable members of Parliament in the House, you need to join First Deputy Prime Minister. The IMF is a major player in this space. Siatini is a player in this space. Is Oxfam in the House? Social distance, and that's why I'll first watch how many of those are, and I think we close it at that point. We have people online. This is part of the SOPs. Let's do this quickly. The First Deputy Prime Minister needs to be first on everything, and she has many other engagements. Make sure I am out of that picture because the value will go out. Keep the picture with its value. Now, if you haven't taken, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Right Honorable First Deputy Prime Minister, you will be at liberty to leave at any time of your choice. Siatini, please make sure the protocols are followed. We really appreciate your input into this process and opening this meeting. Now that the meeting is open, we're going to continue with our agenda. In this meeting, as I indicated earlier, we have quite a lot of representation. Some people are online, some people are in the House. We have members of Parliament, we have senior government officials, we have members of the Miaka, Yala, development partners, EAC Secretariat. We have entities of government like National Planning Authority, Uganda Investment Authority. We have the academia, and professionals. I think there must be some accountants here. We need them in the House when it comes to tax matters. You don't want to leave your accountant behind, or else you get many things wrong. So I want to believe there are quite a number of those that we invited, and they are in the House. It's about tax and prudent debt management and the extractive sector, and we are going to have a good conversation on these issues. Our Right Honorable First Deputy Prime Minister has already given us her remarks. We have Honorable Dixon Kateshuma in the House. Jane Nalunga, as you know, is in the House. Madame Kapoiz Isabella, IMF. If I get that wrong, me and her will set ourselves elsewhere, not in this House, because there she would understand me better. Moses Kagwa, I hope, is in the House, or he's the representative. I know there was a top management arranged for today there, where he's very central in the same discussions of revenue mobilization. So he may not be here physically, might join us in the space. Honorable George Stephan Odongo and Evelyn Akech. And myself, Fred Muhumza, who is supposed to be making sure things are flowing well. And the next part of the flow of this program is to listen in on the role of the Yala in the harmonization and enforcement of policies and laws in the EAC region. What are the opportunities and what are the challenges? This is going to be by Honorable Odongo George Stephan, the Coordinator, Uganda Chapter at the East African Legislative Assembly. Honorable, you have the floor. I'll make sure you are safe. Your people and me want you to be very, very safe.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fred Mumza. Once again, honorable members of parliament, members of civil society who are here, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. My topic is very, very straightforward, but before I go into the topic, I would like to thank Siatini for always being there to support the Assembly and to support EAC. As a think tank, you have influenced a lot of policies and discussions that have taken place in Arusha by the research that you have conducted. Thank you so much. Also want to thank civil society members who are here. It has always been our prayer as members of Yala that we actually have this community owned by its rightful owners, the people, as indeed it is stated that this is supposed to be a people-centered integration. So the participation of civil society underscores that, and would wish that as much as possible you can expand this conversation to involve as many stakeholders as possible, and also to inspire others in the different sectors to get involved, because this EAC can only be EAC when we have all East Africans being part of that process. In any case, the treaty is very clear about the role of civil society. For a greater part of the existence of EAC, it has been largely officialdom. So there is too much official work, and there is very little that is coming in from the other stakeholders, the people especially. So if you can mobilize the people and be part of these conversations, well and good. In any case, we are doing it for them. Now, I bring you warm greetings from Yala, and particularly from the Speaker of Yala, who is aware of this dialogue today, and is happy that as Uganda, we are leading the process of having this conversation extended into the region. Tax harmonization and harmonization of policies very critical to EAC. Yala is an institution, an organ of the East African community. The East African community is structured in such a way that it mirrors the governance systems in our different partner states. So we have the legislature, which is Yala. We have the executive, which is Council of Ministers, plus the heads of summit, heads of state summit. And we also have court, the EAC Court of Justice. So our governance system is such that it mirrors what happens in the partner states. But in this case, therefore, Yala does the legislative function. But I just wanted to contextualize that a little bit before I can go into the specifics of our role in harmonization of policies and laws. That whereas the structuring of EAC mirrors our systems in our different partner states, it is not exactly in terms of the way it functions. For example, Yala has a shared legislative function with Summit. So we pass laws, but also Summit has the prerogative to pass laws. And whereas Yala can pass laws, Summit has the veto powers. So Summit has the powers to veto. That's a different experience with our national parliaments, where if a parliament passes a legislation and the heads of state do not assent to, there is a back and forth engagement, but finally parliament is the one that has the final say on legislation. That is not the case for East African Community, at least in the current dispensation. And we hope that in the conversations that are ongoing, there can be reforms that can then empower the Assembly with the exclusive mandate to legislate. For now, Summit still reserves veto powers on legislative functions of the Assembly. My paper is very specific on the role of Yala in harmonization of policies and laws. Now, the way the EAC is structured is such that we have a Council of Ministers. Policy is a function of Council of Ministers. The Council of Ministers has the mandate to originate policies, to originate regulations that govern the EAC. Now, the policies and regulations are initiated by the Secretariat, by the different departments of the Secretariat. So if there is a policy related to tax, the department in the Secretariat of Economic Affairs is the one that initiates conversations around policy changes, and it's escalated to the council, to the what they call the sectoral council. Now, there are different sectoral councils. So you have sectoral council on economy, you have a sectoral council on defense, you have a sectoral council on foreign affairs, you have a sectoral council on trade. So depending on where a specific policy is domiciled, that is where the conversation takes place. And once the sectoral council deliberates on a specific policy proposal, it is then brought for the Council of Ministers to adopt. Now, the Council of Ministers is very specific. Council of Ministers are ministers of EAC and the Attorneys General. Those are the ones that are called Council of Ministers. So once a sectoral council has approved a specific policy proposal, it is then submitted to the Council of Ministers, which Council of Ministers then considers that proposal and has it approved. Therefore, the role of Yala in policy is on matters of oversight. We oversee the implementation of policies. Once a policy has been passed, Yala then goes around in the different partner states to see whether a specific policy that has been passed by council, which then commits the whole region, is being implemented by the different institutions, the different organs in the different partner states. Two is that Yala also can influence policy through resolutions, because policy is not within the ambit of the Assembly. But Yala can come up with a resolution of the House and ask the Council of Ministers to consider coming up with a specific policy for the EAC. So our role again is that of influencing the Council of Ministers to come up with a specific policy direction. And this can be in line with petitions that we receive from members of the public. If you look at policies of EAC, they are largely meant to harmonize existing policies, because different partner states have different policies on a wide range of issues. So when there is a specific interest within the EAC to have a policy, it has to harmonize with the existing policy frameworks in the different partner states. So if you look at the policies of EAC, you will see that a great deal of those policies have actually been harmonization of the different policies in the different partner states. Now, policies at times are then translated into bills. Now, once it becomes clear that such a policy needs the strength of law, then legislation is originated in order to translate a specific policy into a law. Now, that can be either through Council of Ministers, front bench. So we sometimes refer to it as supply-driven. The front bench originates a bill in line with a specific policy, and it is brought into the House. It's also possible that a private member can look at the policy and look at the implementation gaps and recommend that there is need for specific legislation to give it more strength. And if that happens, then a private member's bill is introduced into the House, and it is processed through the relevant committees of the House. The House has 6 different committees that deal with different issues within the community. So there is also the bit of policies translating into bills. But what I can hasten to say is that the bills that have quickly been translated into laws that have been assented to by partner states are largely bills that have been sponsored by the front bench, by the ministers. But bills that have been sponsored by private members, almost 98% of the bills that the House has passed that have been generated by private members have not been assented to by the partner states. And the reasons are varied. Some of it are differences in our political systems, differences in our legal systems, the implications of such a bill on the existing policy frameworks in the different partner states. So, you know, to process a private member's bill is an elaborate process. And many times, private members' bills, even when they are assented to, even when they are passed by the Assembly, really have a lot of difficulties in being assented to by the partner states. And remember, I told you initially that we have a shared mandate with Summit having veto powers. So many times the private members' bills have not really gained much traction in as far as our legislative role is concerned. So if you see, Arusha is a graveyard of so many private members' bills that have been passed by the Assembly, some of which are actually bills that have been generated through public interest. You know, there are lots of petitions that we as an Assembly receive that we see are very critical for our integration, but then it's limited when it comes to assent. Again, what I need to point out here is that our legislative function has a limited scope. It is limited to our areas of cooperation as defined in the treaty. Sometimes members of the public have thought that we have an open-ended, we have the wiggle room to legislate on almost all matters. It's not true. Our legislative function is restricted to the scope of our cooperation under the EAC treaty. So it is very well defined. If you go beyond that, you would be working outside the realms of the mandates of the Assembly and that of the EAC. So as it is right now, the EAC treaty defines our cooperation, and there are matters that are left for the sovereign partner states. Now, the EAC treaty and its, as far as domestication of resource mobilization is concerned, the EAC treaty includes in its objective the attainment of sustainable growth and development of the partner states. That is contained in Article 5.3 of the treaty, raising the standard of living and improving the quality of life of their populations. That's also under Article 5. And that these objectives require enough resources to be mobilized, and this is in line with the Addis Tax Declaration Initiative 2015, which affirms that mobilization and effective use of domestic resources are central to the achievement of sustainable development goals. The EAC Treaty and its protocols on customs union, common market, and monetary union underscore the need for harmonization of policies and laws pertaining to revenue mobilization. Those are all contained in the treaty. Article 83, 2E of the treaty says partner states shall harmonize their tax policies with a view of removing tax distortions for a more efficient allocation of resources. Customs union entails application of a common external tariff on goods imported from within and removal of customs duties on goods imported from within the community with evidence of certificate of origin. Article 32 of the Common Market Protocol also talks about harmonization of tax policies and laws and removal of distortions. Article 8 of the EAC Monetary Union provides for harmonization and coordination of fiscal policies and avoidance of harmful tax competition. You can see that a lot of it has to do with harmonization, because you are dealing with partner states that already have existing policies, existing legal frameworks that facilitate trade and facilitate their fiscal policies. So all of it has to do with how do we harmonize. The Council of Ministers has also developed policies and instruments to implement the provisions of the treaty to harmonize policies and laws. This includes the EAC Domestic Tax Harmonization Policy, which was approved by Council of Ministers in May 2019. You can see that it was just approved recently. The policy applies to excise duties, VAT, income tax, with the objectives of eliminating distortions that undermine the implementation of our Common Market Protocol and the EAC Monetary Union Protocol, and also to facilitate cross-border trade, investment, to promote sustainable growth and fair distribution of available resources, avoid harmful tax competition that may, artificially render our partner states more attractive than the other. So there can be, if not really harmonized, then you could have some very unfair competitions, and yet we are saying we are in an environment of we are in a common market. So there is need to harmonize and regulate the conduct of each partner state so that one does not want to outcompete the other by coming out with a different investment policy, a different tax regime. EAC Tax Treaty Policy, which was developed to guide the development of the EAC Model Tax Treaty for the avoidance of double taxation and prevention of fiscal evasion with respect to taxes on income. The EAC Agreement for the Avoidance of Double Tax and the Prevention of Fiscal Evasion with respect to taxes on income. That's the DTA, Double Taxation Agreement. Memorandum of Understanding on Exchange of Information on Tax, Expertise, and other related matters that was adopted by East African Revenue Authorities in 2010. The good news is that we have a tax guru here, so he's going to bring us to speed with some of the experiences that we have with respect to taxation. Yala has made significant contributions in that respect through several resolutions. As I told you initially, that most of these have been harmonization of policies, and they are done through our different protocols. And protocols are essentially the mandate of Council of Ministers. So it's a government to government. Again, I need to underscore the fact that our EAC is an intergovernmental organization. It's a relationship that exists between governments, and a lot of conversations are done at government to government level, and it's guided by protocols that are agreed upon by the different partner states. Unfortunately, the process of ratification of our EAC double taxation agreement has taken too long, and some partner states have called for review, have called for amendment of our agreement before it is implemented. As you know, the EAC works on the principle of consensus, and consensus in this case is all the 6 partner states. And as of yesterday, the Council of Ministers, in an extraordinary meeting, passed a resolution to fast-track the integration of DRC into the EAC. That means we now have 7. It means that if there is any policy and a protocol that has been developed, it has to be, you know, all the 6 partner states have got to agree to it within the principle of consensus. I know that consensus has been a problem, and somebody even took the EAC to court to actually define what consensus is, because there are people who are saying, and rightfully so, that consensus can mean 5 out of 6. You can define consensus because it's an operative word. It's something that is supposed to operationalize the workings of EAC. But the court declined to be very specific on it and said that that's a political issue. It is not supposed to be a legal issue. It is a matter that is contained in our cooperation agreements, and it is for the Council of Ministers and the summit to determine what they mean as consensus. For now, in their definition, consensus is all the 6. So that has also been a major challenge. And that's why you see that the double taxation agreement has taken quite a long, long time. And some of the partner states have actually weaponized the consensus principle and have used it to undermine, you know, the speed at which we are implementing some of the commitments in EAC. So there is the challenge of consensus. The success so far that we have recorded is the enactment of the EAC Customs Management Act of 2004. And I know that as of recent, we also amended the EAC Customs Management Act. And that has also taken quite a protracted conversation because there were some partner states that were fearing loss of revenues. And that is really one of the things, maybe we'll talk about it when I look at the opportunities and the challenges that we face. With respect to prudent debt management, the Monetary Union Protocol requires that the partner states, as a prerequisite to achieve higher degree of economic convergence, there are 4 primary convergence criteria. Public debt of 50% on GDP, on NPV, net present value, ceiling on headline inflation to remain at 8%, the reserve cover of 4.5 of month of imports, and a ceiling on the overall deficit of 3% of GDP, including grant. But due to a number of factors, mainly the impact of COVID, there has been a requirement for a lot of public expenditure and a number of ongoing infrastructure projects. So this has really put a strain on the partner states, and I think there has been a very high affinity to contract debts. The Assembly, Assembly recently tabled a motion to restrain partner states from debt contracting. Issues of debt governance is a very critical issue, and I would really want to call upon our civil society and members of parliament in our national parliaments here to really interrogate debt. I know that debt is very attractive, and there is a very thin line between bad debt and development debts. You know, so the justification has always been we need to develop infrastructure in order to facilitate trade, to generate more incomes, and we shall pay off the debts. So it's a very delicate balance, but it needs really that we have open conversations that facilitate management of our debts. So debt contracting and debt governance is a very critical area for us as members of Yala, and we have raised it on the floor of the House because we have seen that most of our partner states are within the red lights Most of them have actually gone beyond the 50%. I'll tell you that countries like South Sudan, Burundi, Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda, we have all gone, all we are within the red light or even gone above. It's only maybe Tanzania that is yet at about 38 to 40%. So there is need for that conversation to take place, and actually as an assembly we have raised it, and it's a matter that we have asked the Council of Ministers to escalate to summit and have a conversation around those areas. EAC is an intergovernmental organization of independent and sovereign partner states. While regional policies and laws are adopted at EAC level, their implementation is in the territory of partner states and by the responsible officers of the partner states. I said this earlier on that while we have the EAC and we have a treaty, the partner states still reserve their sovereignty. So it's like you give with one hand and withdraw with the other. However, in its current formation, the EAC has a scope of cooperation. And that's why the partner states still reserve their sovereignty, their sovereign powers. Maybe if we transition into a political confederation, conversation of which is going on, but even under a political confederation, there will only be specific sectors that shall be ceded to the region. So if it is trade, then we have the sector of trade, ceded to the region. If it is foreign policy and defense, we cede that particular sector. The rest remain under the sovereign control of the different partner states. That's when we transition. So as it is now, our cooperation is guided by the treaty, which defines cooperation areas, and partner states still reserve that sovereign powers. Now, because of the principle of consensus and because of the sovereignty that is still preserved under our treaty, sometimes it becomes very difficult for a lot of things to gain a lot of traction. And that's why you see people will say, oh, what are you people doing in EAC about this? What are you doing about that? We are entangled in this very complex web of power dynamics with the different power structures, with different centers of power that control the workings of the EAC. So it's not really as straightforward as people may see outside here. As already mentioned, laws enacted by the Assembly takes precedence when it enacts laws with respect to EAC integration. Let me again underscore that bit, that when the Assembly enacts a law, and that law, of course, all the laws that we enact are within our cooperation agreements and with respect to our integration. Those laws take precedence over any other law in the different partner states. So what happens is that the partner states will now try to approximate their laws and make sure that they are consistent with regional legislation on matters of regional integration. So that is like things like customs laws, anything to do with our regional integration. We have, as we speak, we have the East African Monetary Institute. We are trying to transition into single currency for the region. The law has been assented to by the heads of summit, but there are also other support instruments that require legislation, which I will mention as I quickly close it. The treaty provides that there will be liaisons, that we shall always liaise with the national parliaments, and that is done through the ministries responsible for EAC and through the secretariat and clerks of parliament, that whatever kind of legislation takes place, we liaise with the members of parliament, and that helps us to coordinate, liaise, and work on matters of debt management or any other that we need that ground traction. Now, what are the challenges? I said earlier on, consensus. That animal called consensus. For whatever decision we take, it has to be agreed upon by all partner states. All. And when they say all, it means all of them. So that's why you see that there is a lot that goes on at the EAC. For example, if we have seen situations where partner states have withdrawn or even just chosen not to send when there are critical issues of discussion where they do not agree with, they just deny quorum. And because of the requirement of consensus, you find that there are 5 partner states have all converged in Arusha, and 1 is not there. So the conversation is almost null and void, because whatever decisions you take place there without one single partner state does not pass the test. So consensus is one of those areas. Then 2 is there is really a huge preference for directives of Council of Ministers other than legislation. So you know, Council of Ministers really is really like it's both strategic and operational at the same time. Strategic in the sense that they can originate policy, they can originate legislation, but operational in the sense that they also determine the day-to-day running of the Secretariat. So they are in this space that gives them a lot of leverage. Now, and I think this is where really we have functional difficulties within the ESC, and there is need to interrogate and examine the structuring of the ESC, so that, you know, we delineate responsibilities, yet at the same time we make sure that we are functionally supportive of each institution and organ, particularly the organs. There are also differences in our legal systems. And this is, most of our legal systems are predicated upon our historical colonial systems. So in Uganda, for example, we still have the British Westminster systems, and you still have in Rwanda and Burundi, they have the Belgian, French systems. So we use different lenses to look at our laws, our policies. And that also is an area that causes a lot of challenges for the community. Then there is also unprincipled competition within the different partner states, you know. And instead of looking at complementarity, we look at competitiveness, individual competitiveness. And you can see that especially when it comes to trade matters, where the law is very clear and so on. So if you play by the rules, and then one party has built capacity to generate more trade volumes, and then another one decides to, you know, to use a completely different provision. You saw it where some partner states can just decide to look for something like aflatoxins levels are high. So you hide behind some kind of aflatoxin because you know that under the common market protocol you are wrong. So what do? You have to look for something to do with aflatoxin. So technically you say, you know, we are protecting, because the sovereignty gives you the opportunity to protect the health and interests of the partner state. So you use that. Now, the weaponization of these provisions is a very wrong practice, and it takes place in our different partner states from time to time. There is also fear of loss of tax revenue. Fear of loss of tax revenue. I remember we sponsored an amendment to the Customs Management Act. And this is something that had been going on, I think, from Yala 3, and I'm glad that the Honorable Nakauki is here. She was one of those people who really had a very loud voice, because from time to time, our traders here would petition, would come up. They are really treated very, very badly in the ports. And we saw that the problem is now within the Customs Management Act. So we came up with an amendment. And that amendment was very, very popular, because even Kenya, which was a beneficiary of that particular, because they have the port, for once saw sense, because we were trying to look at the mathematics, and we realized it was unfair to land-linked countries like Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, and South Sudan. But when it was brought to the floor, and we were debating on the floor, and when it reached the point at which we were supposed to pass, it was a very popular bill, the members of Tanzania simply walked out to deny us quorum. And when we had engagement with them, they told us that there was fear of loss of revenue. So you can see how sometimes narrow partner state interests can override the big picture. And the failure to understand that when you facilitate trade and there are greater trade volumes within the partners, within the region, you generate more incomes that are even much bigger, but you are focusing on only that small revenue stream. So it was really one of those very low moments for the Assembly, and particularly for us. And I know that the Honorable Nakauki here did not take it so well, because she had really, really put in quite a lot of effort to ensure that that bill passes, and most of our colleagues are here. Then there is also, of course, the sovereignty syndrome, which usually disguises protectionism. So you come up with a policy, and then they say this policy is in contravention of certain provisions of our Constitution. Let me give you a clear example. This one is largely on governance. I hope I'm not treading on very delicate lines, but the United Republic of Tanzania is not keen on certain provisions of that touch on their governance systems. It has been slow even to ratify the African Charter on good governance and democracy, because of their constitutional provision that says once an election takes place and the results have been announced, that election cannot be contested in any courts of law. So once a president has been elected and declared by the Electoral Commission, that's the end of business. Once so you cannot go and contest it in court. And for them, it's a very important provision, and they feel it is the one that has sustained their stability. So if you are coming up with provisions to say, you can seek redress of court in the event you are not satisfied with the outcomes of that election, you have no place to go. But these are standards that we have, and they are supposed to be domesticated. So there are all those differences, and that's why we have to look at the EAC with those lenses that say it is work in progress, that we must continue to scale, we must continue to engage, and I'm happy that we are doing the same right now. There's also lack of credible data, evidence to inform policies and laws. There are data. You see, if you went to, say, South Sudan right now, you will struggle a lot to get credible and reliable data to use. So that's also one of the areas. So if you're coming up with a policy, you're coming up with a specific legislation, you have to just to be evidence-based. So you need that evidence-based kind of conversation to arrive at a policy position or a legislation that is responsive. But if the different partner states do not have that capacity, then it becomes a problem. So there is also that bit. There is limited jurisdiction of the courts of justice. Court is a very, justice tell people the laws, the justice, the legal systems, is the software that should drive, and it is the, your last, the last trench of defense should be the courts, and the courts should be functioning. But our courts, as it is right now, have limited jurisdictions. There are matters that the court cannot adjudicate as far as our treaty is concerned. And it has always been our prayer that, and we have pushed that quite a bit with Council, that the summit needs to look at the jurisdictions of the EAC so that it's able to adjudicate on a wide scope of areas that can facilitate our integration. Notwithstanding the above, the treaty and its protocol expressly provide for legal basis for harmonization of policies. That's an opportunity that is there. That even with the existing legal resources, like the treaty and the laws and the protocols, there is still an opportunity for the community to ensure that there is harmonization of taxes, there is harmonization of policies. So it is there. It just needs tapping into it, and needs, I tell people that there is no single government in the world, let alone one that cooperates, because you see the EAC is a corporation, but there is no single government in the world that works without pressure. You need to exert the necessary pressure to have things work, because priorities are there. Every government has priorities. So if you think this is a priority, then you need to focus more attention on it. So we need to tap on the existing legal frameworks to ensure that there is more positive traction in the area of harmonization of taxes and using the existing policies. All the countries still have untapped shared resources. It's a lot. Our blue economy is almost dead. There is too much research that is lying idle. There's a lot of research. If you go to the Lake Victoria Basin Commission, which is domiciled in Kisumu, for example, they will give you a lot of research on the blue economy. And I can assure you that just this lake alone can generate revenue that can run the whole of EAC without you touching on anything, not even your oil, not even the, just the lake alone. If it is properly, if we properly make the best use of that lake, it can generate. What we see in that lake are just a few canoes when you're seeing there, because we are seeing the lake as a source of only fish. So we need to really think outside the box and see the opportunities that are there. So there is quite a lot of opportunities that we can tap into. So there are natural resources, oil, minerals, water, the exploitation of which require harmonized policies and laws. And I'm happy that we are even having a conversation on extractive industries, because that has been an area that has been prone to illicit financial flows. And you know that the numbers are skyrocketing. Every single time you look at the numbers on IFFs in the region and in the country, we are in trouble. So civil society, legislators, this is an area that we should take an interest in. There's a lot of huge Western capital that is flowing here that goes and is not within the purview of our state institutions, or are working with those very ones to undermine, the sovereignty of our resource. So we need to look at some of those things critically and see how do we deal with them, how do we make it work. I'm happy that we have in Uganda a law, the Oil Act, and we are having other supportive legislations to monitor and regulate our oil sector. But we need really to look at harmonization across the region. That is still an opportunity that we have. There is also an ever-increasing awareness of people and calls for efficient utilization of domestic resources and prudent management of public debt. There is now a lot of interest in the area of debt governance, and I can see that there's a lot of researches that are taking place, civil society is involved, even government itself is taking interest. So, and wananchi are out there, you know, the social media has democratized information. So this is yet another opportunity that we have to ensure that we can have efficient utilization of domestic resources. The limited funding from partners, from development partners, is also an opportunity. You see, the complacence around foreign development assistance is what should provoke us to think outside the box. So this should be an opportunity for us to look at and see that we can now begin to generate resources domestically because the donor sector is receding. And now, you know, I was reading the other day that, and I saw a cartoon where they're saying that USAID is walking out of the health sector. So what happens to our health sector if the USAID walks out? That gives us the opportunity to think internally on how we can generate our domestic revenues. We as an assembly, in fact, in this plenary that is ending in March, there has been a review of the calendar, and most likely during this plenary up to March, we are enacting the Surveillance Act, which is part of the requirement for the implementation of the East African requirement for the monetary union, because we already have the East African Monetary Institute bill, which is now an act. We also passed the East African Statistics Bureau bill to aggregate statistics. Basically, the Monetary Institute bill that we passed, which is now an act because it has been assented to, will put in place an institution that is supposed to midwife an East African Central Bank. And as a transition, it is, at the moment, it has a board that comprises of the heads of the central banks of the East African community. The discussion now is about where it is going to be headquartered. And I think Uganda has applied, Kenya has applied, Tanzania has applied, Rwanda has applied. So I don't know if everybody applies, then who will assess? Because all of them are interested parties. But anyways, the process is ongoing, and I hope that soon we should not be held back by just who hosts, but it should be that it begins to work. And that is part of the work that will help us, because then with that, you know that your tax fiscal policies will be harmonized. You're going to have harmonized exchange rates. You'll have a stable fiscal environment as a region. You'll also have a stable monetary environment as a region. And this is very, very critical for our integration. So these are really some of the thoughts that we have and what we as the Yala are doing with respect to harmonization of policies and domestic revenue mobilization. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Anybody who owns a factory for sanitizers, I want to come for some contribution towards my Valentine arrangements. They are stalled right now because of money. Thank you, Right Honorable, for the insightful remarks that you have given to us. I hope we are picking up the issues because they are going to feed into our discussion. As I said, we have some people online. Don't go and sleep off, and please keep your videos off, because we might see what is happening in your house, the chicken and the goats that are running around in your house. So yet you told us you sleep in some palace where chickens should be elsewhere. I'm going to give very limited time to 3 interventions, and then we get into a panel discussion, which is the last part of our engagement this morning. We are mindful of the time of everybody, but also want to get value out of this discussion. So it's somebody to talk about tax harmony, Esther. Esther, where are you? You'll have some 5 minutes, and then I'll invite Penny Mbabazi to talk about debt. I will invite James Muhindo to talk about the extractives. Your time starts now. You might have some extra time of 1 minute to add on the 5.
Thank you very much. The honorable members of parliament, the development partners, the CSO members are present. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Esther Kisembo. I work with ActionAid Uganda. I come on behalf of the Tax Justice Alliance, and I'm just addressing a few issues on what we believe as the CSO, because this is the CSO position paper on the status of domestic resource mobilization in the East African community. And I'm just going to have to address the issue on tax harmonization in the East African region. Because as CSOs, we believe to avoid issues of tax evasion, tax avoidance, and harmful practices in the East African region, there are some issues that we think have to be addressed. Among them, we are looking at the East African Agreement for the avoidance of the double taxation that has not been ratified yet. And our observation as the CSO is the East African Agreement for the avoidance of the double taxation was intended to do a few things: to avoid double non-taxation of the resident state tax or the income, or exempt the income from tax, then to stimulate the cross-border investment movement on the labor in East Africa. Then we also thought the intention was to end the race to the bottom, then to also try to close the loopholes that emerge with taxation on the cross-border income, where here we're looking at double taxation and non-taxation. But it's also, however, important to note that in case of the loopholes, the treaty can be used to avoid payment of tax. So although countries in the East African community have signed the agreement in 2010, they have not yet been able to ratify it, so the implementation becomes difficult. So as the CSO, we believe the rationale for all this, for the East African Agreement on the avoidance of the double or DTS was, the agreement has gone unratified now for 11 years. Given the contextual changes with the East African community over the past years, such as the expected boom of mining and oil and the gas sector, the emergence of the international financial centers in Kigali and the Nairobi, among others, it is possible that the treaty might not be entirely fit for the purpose. So what are we recommending? We are calling upon Yala to conduct a comprehensive assessment on the suitability of the treaty in the current East African context. Maybe, for example, there is a need to ascertain if the current clauses in the treaty are responsive to the emergence of the international financial centers, the expanding mining, oil and gas sector, among others. We also recommend that it will also be important to conduct an analysis to ascertain why member states have not ratified the agreement, because then without ratification, then it's very hard for the implementation to take place. Also, we are also calling upon Yala to explore and address one key issue that remains with the extent on which the common external tariffs is implemented, especially the sensitive commodities. Several challenges remain with some countries fronting domestic sufficiency. Then the second issue that we are looking at here under tax harmonization is the non-alignment to the model East African Community Double Taxation Treaty for the member states to guide tax treaty negotiations between East African countries and other countries. Here our observation was that the model of East African Double Taxation Treaty was adopted in 2017. It provides a common East African position as member states should negotiate with other countries to avoid the race to bottom. However, it's still not clear whether the ongoing negotiations of the new and existing treaties are conforming to the provisions within the treaty. The rationale to this is having a common guide for the negotiations of the DTS among East African partner states is key towards promoting tax harmonization, preventing the race to the bottom, as well as the tax avoidance and evasion. So what are our recommendations? We are recommending that we're calling upon the East African member states to align the double taxation agreement to the East African model on the DTAs and on the African Tax Administrative Forum. Then we're also calling for advocacy efforts to be directed towards ensuring that the East African partner states adopt the model treaty in the negotiations with the non-East African states. Then also, we're also calling upon the East African Community Secretariat to help in the development of the framework to monitor and track country-level negotiations to ensure that they conform to the East African Model Treaty. And the good thing, the Right Honourable who was just speaking here, he just told us among the key things they do, it's an oversight work that they do in implementation of these. So I believe these are good recommendations that can be taken up. Then we also have an issue on the existing gaps in the implementation of the memorandum of understanding, the MOU on the exchange of the information on tax matters. Here our observation is that this is currently being implemented between Uganda and Kenya, but it's not clear to what extent it is being implemented by other states in the East African community. And also have an observation of the border closures between Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, which indicate that there might be a gap to this extent in the implementation of this MOU. So the rationale here is we're looking at the exchange of information, which is a very critical role, which is very critical for the government, of course, to make decisions and also help in other laws. So here we are saying that exchange of information is critical for the government in the East African community to maximize revenue collection and prevent revenue losses that could arise as a result of the tax avoidance and evasion, especially among the multinationals. What's our recommendation? We are recommending and calling upon the East African, the Yala, to conduct an analysis on the status of implementation of the MOU on exchange of information in all the partner states. We're also looking at advocacy efforts that should be directed towards the need for increased automatic exchange of information on tax matters, tax matters. Then the other issue, the fourth issue, is the slow enforcement on the Council Directive on harmonization of tax processes and procedures. Our observation here is that in 2014, the East African community partner states adopted the Council Directives on the harmonization of the tax processes and procedures in order to facilitate the free movement of goods, labor, and services, and ensure low taxpayer compliance costs for entities operating in the community, the EA community. But however, the rationale here is that this is going to help to achieve, it will be easy to achieve, to achieve, as countries will easily see the revenue incentives. So we do recommend an establish to what extent each member state are enforcing these directives and which countries are not. Then we're also looking at establishing if there are any gaps in the implementation within the states or between the states. Then we also recommend that there's need for harmonization in the implementation of the quick win and specific measures like digital stamps in all East African states. Then also to persuade the East African Community Council of Ministers and or the East African Secretariat to prioritize and fast-track tax harmonization processes in the region. And then we also had an issue on the Council Directive on harmonization of the tax incentives, where in 2014, the East African partner states adopted the Council Directives on harmonization of the tax incentives in order to avoid harmful tax competitions. But there's also an existing CSO study on the consequences of the harmful incentives. And as the right honorable speaker was speaking, he said that we need to do a lot of evidence-based kind of research. And I think CSOs were trying to see how to harmonize and get this research. So here the rationale is to avoid the race to bottom. And our recommendations on this issue is to advocate for the development and implementation of the policies that guide how incentives are awarded, cost-benefit analysis, rules and guidelines on renewals. Then we also conduct also an analysis on the prevailing incentives regimes of the different member states in East Africa community, how they are issued, the success stories, best practices, and bad practices for learning purposes, and maybe also to inform the changes. Then, what aspects we also need to identify and agree with the sectors that should be granted the incentives, advocate for harmonized VAT zero rating, applying it to a limited list of goods and services, assess the compliance of each partner states with requirements for delivery of annual statements on parliament to incentives as per the articles in the country. Then also assess the extent of the implementation of the Council Directive on harmonization of tax incentives. All provisions should be implemented. We had several, but because of time, I have to run to the last two. We also had an issue on the East African domestic tax harmonization policy, which policy was adopted by the Council in May 2019. So here we are wondering, is there a directive to implement it? Countries cannot implement without a Council directive. So here we are trying to say that we are recommending for Yala to persuade member countries to implement the policy, also review the policy and understand its provisions, conduct impact analysis before decisions are made. Because then the rationale here, it is fairly recent policy, and CSOs need to understand well its provisions for successful advocacy with the East African community and partners. Then lastly, was on international financial centers. And here our observation was concerning the emerging of the IFCs with the establishment of Nairobi and Kigali financial centers and potential impact on East African community, both negative and positive. And we're recommending the recommendation was to build a CSO's capacity to understand the IFCs, because then if we understand them, it will be easy for us to engage better with that understanding. Then also to establish common CSO positions on the international financial centers. Then Yala should also exercise oversight authority and monitor the East African countries in order to protect the region from tax competition that is likely to arise as a result of the existence of the IFCs. So thank you. That is it from me.
Thank you very much. Yala members, we are loading things on your desk to carry to the region. We have already been told many challenges. I don't know that there is a provision on when everybody applies to host an office. Do we throw a die? Do we cast a coin? Do we go to penalty shootouts? I don't know. But these are the challenges we are facing as a region. If we all are over struggling to host an office, and yet the matters to be discussed in that office are the most important ones, then you begin to see how far we are and the burden that we have to make progress. I'm waiting for Penny Mbabazi in the house. We are streaming live, so even for us here who are in this room, we need to be conscious. You might be seen on YouTube by those who escaped the borders. They are able to see Zoom. So we are on YouTube, we are on Facebook, we are on Twitter, Siatin Uganda, the Twitter the handles. We are also on Zoom, as I've said, hashtag DRM program, and then DRM. And already Prime from Burundi has said, let's link tax with digitization. You have the floor.
Good morning, honorable members of parliament and from Yala. I'll be taking you through some of the concerns we have under debt. And the first is that we know there is the East African Monetary Union Protocol, which has had challenges when it comes to adherence, basically mainly on the convergence criteria that was set in the protocol. We know so many countries have already had to acquire a lot of debt during the time of COVID. And some of the challenges we're seeing is that most of the EAC partner states that are in line with trying to harmonize their laws are failing to actually also be able to adhere to the YAM protocol. So we see that most of the issues that are going to rise from first, basically seeing that most countries will continue to borrow, but mainly on how exactly they're using the resources that they're getting will be also a big challenge. So our observation here is that within the Yala, we know that there was supposed to be an establishment of the East African Surveillance Compliance and Enforcement Commission, which would have to enforce compliance to the convergence targets that were set. Those mainly include debt to GDP ratio not being more than the 50% threshold that was set, inflation not exceeding more than 8%, fiscal deficit not exceeding 3%, and we're seeing most of these are already actually some of the issues that, some of the main criteria that East African country partner states need to pay close attention to. So the East African Surveillance Compliance Enforcement Commission and Enforcement Commission would be able to actually see compliance of these criteria. The rationale here is that the commission was supposed to actually be in place by 2018, but has not yet been passed by Yala. And seeing that there is no mechanism to enforce compliance of partner states, this will instead create a lot of delay when it comes to having proper ways of mitigating any risks of countries exceeding these criteria. So our recommendation here is that we call upon EAC partner states to adopt the establishment of the East African Surveillance Compliance and Enforcement Commission, which would enforce this compliance to the criteria, as well as also align national legislations and regional protocols to strengthen monitoring and enforcement mechanisms to ensure adherence. Also, we see that there is need for Yala members of state to establish a committee within the East African Surveillance Compliance and Enforcement Commission that would ensure corrections to be introduced before deviations. So in case member states are actually failing to be able to meet or adhere to the criteria that have been set, this committee would be able to actually pull more compliance and also correct in case of any deviations from different member states. Also, we know that so many of the ESC member states have public debt management frameworks, like Uganda, the medium-term debt management strategy, which right now are actually being used as tools and strategies to provide a way for government to avoid risks and have trade-offs in case there are actual challenges in them failing them to be able to be below the 50% threshold. So we believe that this also needs to be looked at on how best countries can be able to actually have some of these frameworks harmonized across all countries, the public debt management framework, as well as medium-term debt management strategies that can be able to be adopted by different partner states. Some countries are lagging behind when it comes to having these legal frameworks in place and actually in existence and being used. Secondly, issue here is that regional parliaments need to harmonize adoption of debt registers, Hansards, to access information on debt by the public. And this is mainly coming due because of challenges when it comes to information on debt. We know it's not often that you can find most ESC member states having information on debt and even being published to the public to be able to ensure that at least transparency when it comes to loan contraction, even to how much is actually spent and to what or for what is it actually utilized for, is not actually being properly produced and displayed. So here mainly we see that Kenya as a country is actually having debt registers, and they have gone ahead to document them and put them on their website, just as an example for what countries can look into, especially our Yala members here. We can be able to see that other member countries can actually also be able to establish debt registers, but mainly not only capturing external loans, but also domestic, when it comes to ensuring that we have the necessary information that can be able to have more consultation with stakeholders, but also to inform the public of how well we're actually doing when it comes to debt. But also we know that it will kind of also mitigate some issues on transparency and accountability. And so much of this actually also goes to those creditors that actually financing countries. Most of these issues are raised basically to ensure that countries can be able to improve their credibility when they're actually borrowing some of these loans. So transparency and accountability is one of them. And we believe this is a better position on making sure that governments in different EAC member states can be able to establish debt registers, as well as also Hansards that can be able to come from the parliaments within these EAC member states. We see at least just an example for Uganda. They are mainly producing these Hansards and putting them on their parliament website. But we want to see also that these Hansards also discuss the terms of loans. Some of them actually do skip this information, but while it is a step in the right direction, we would want to see it also being streamlined across the region to other states to take on. So our recommendation is mainly to see that at least some of these positions on the debt registers are mainly for them to cover mostly the creditors, both domestic and external loans, as well as the purpose of the loans, the interest rate being accumulated, amount standing, amount repaid, or amount outstanding when it comes to these loans being borrowed, so that that information is properly and wide enough for people to actually be able to participate and also be informed. Thirdly, we see there's a need for provision of debt ceilings adopted by EAC member states. We know that the Convergence, the IAMO protocol actually does talk about debt ceilings, but this is actually not coming into realization because I know for Kenya, they actually have a debt ceiling. Unfortunately, sometimes it can be also debated on whether they can pass the ceiling for some financial year, but it is much more better to have countries be able to know that within a certain period or within a certain percentage, how much exactly are they expected to be able to know that they cannot exceed for a period of, if it be 5 years or 3 years, the better. So we see that given Uganda has a public debt management framework and a debt strategy, as well as a PFMA, which we know most countries also do have, the compliance is an issue. And we seem to see Tanzania, Burundi, and Rwanda have no national legislation on budget balance rules, but use EAC targets as guiding posts. So we find that it's better, at least for these countries, to be able to adopt these public debt management frameworks, to be able to also have their own national legislations, aside from basing only on the convergence criteria that have already been set in the IAMO. And also, we need to see that legislated fiscal rules, even where in place, can be able to have, to be adhered to. And we also need to see that some of the policies that are in place can be able to actually emphasize this. So we are mainly calling for Yala to call for EAC member states to adhere to having debt ceilings, which are entailed in the convergence, but also should align their national legislations, policy, and legal frameworks. And seeing that Yala can oversee and be able to interrogate debt ceilings for member countries, it would be best that they would be able to take on this, because along the time that we're trying to do a lot of more of borrowing, but also financing of big projects together in partnering as ESC members, it would be good to actually see that countries can still be able to actually know they have a ceiling, or a ceiling where they can actually make sure they don't exceed their debt. The next issue is on value for money and absorption issues. Mainly, I'll just rush through these because of time. Here we're seeing that there are a lot of issues when it comes to value for money, basing on a lot of debt is being taken on because of many infrastructure projects that ESC member country states want to do. And this is already going to cause a challenge when it comes to how best is this money actually going to the intended purpose that it's meant for, mainly also for whether these projects that are being put in place, whether they do have a return in investment, and whether actually a country can be able to benefit from them rather than have to pay off debt for a project and not be able to actually even utilize or enjoy some of these benefits by the people. So here, the rationale here is that efficiency and effectiveness of debt is undermined by limited value for money, poor governance and corruption, and it's common to see that debt can mature before sufficient returns are realized from the investments, especially in infrastructure. And we know that there's been a period of COVID where a lot of countries were not able to actually also carry on with some of the loan terms that most debt had carried in their agreements. So commitment fees have instead been hiked on some of these projects that should have been earlier dispersed. So you find most ESC member states are lagging behind when it comes to actually having proper value for money, as well as also documenting whether these projects are actually going to be able to be done in the right time. So here what we're calling for is mainly to see Yala to oversee ESC member states' plans, align any new borrowing and financing options to funding economic development, growth and poverty reduction. We call upon Yala and ESC member state authorities to ensure low and sustainable debt costs and risks over the short and long term. Basically, at least enforcing that concessional borrowing would be a priority as opposed to non-concessional borrowing, basing off from a lot of challenges that some countries have faced with private lenders like China and others that have had issues when it comes to properly ensuring that some of the projects do not carry any risks that would be imposed on the country. ESC member state authorities should assess potential risks arising from private sector debt as well as contingent liabilities. And this is mainly to ensure that disbursement of resources, feasibility studies, consultations with key stakeholders, and evaluation and progress reports are actually done. And this can be overseen by Yala. Lastly, is strengthening authorities' capacity to improve debt management and tracking of public sector liabilities, off-budget support, contingent liabilities as well, seeing that some countries are actually challenged with the capacity when it comes to seeing how best they can be able to track some of the finances that come into the country, because you find some of them are actually off-budget support, and it makes it a bigger challenge, and instead debt can instead be accumulated without proper tracking. Limited access of information and public participation was also an issue that we see basically mainly when it comes to information on debt that has only been left to the technical people and a few policymakers. This has instead created a gap when it comes to information for countries to be able to actually produce some of this information on debt, mainly on how much of the loans they're taking in when it comes to utilization, acquisitioning, contracting, throughout the whole loan process is actually not documented in some countries. So here we are calling for Yala Secretary to have ESC member states adhere to establishing loan contraction and approval guidelines within their states, and also for Yala to make access to information on debt transparent and accountable to citizens, as well as also considering public and publicly guaranteed debt that sometimes is actually usually left out when computing national debt. So you find most countries are more indebted, but we're not in the know because of the information may be a challenge, also capacity. Just to finish up, lastly, there's the bit of limited Parliament's oversight and involvement in the construction process. I know this is an issue that is cross-cutting. For some parliaments that have not been able to be part of the approval process of some of these loans, we know a lot of money and a lot of resources have come in during the time of COVID for different countries, and we are mainly calling for enforcing regular consultations with the public before approval or contraction of these loans. And we call upon Yala to ensure audits and audit reports are shared and complaints raised are addressed and not ignored. Lastly, dynamics of debt, such as the PPPs, the special drawing rights, which attract some issues on loans. And we seem to see that, of course, with the growing change in the financing architecture, we get to see a lot of loans have come in the form of PPPs and SDRs as well, which are both financing options that would be ideal for countries within the ESC, but some of them actually overshadowing the roles that ideally a country, like a government, would be able to take on to provide the right services for the people. And most of them actually do carry also contingent liabilities when it comes to seeing how best they are in favorable of the countries that are taking on these PPPs, whether they meet the people's demands, whether they actually meet the services that they're supposed to provide, and also mainly if that information is also documented and is transparent, there's that challenge and a gap in there. And also special drawing rights as a alternative for countries to be able to be able to get financing is also important, but most of the time there's no legal framework. Most countries don't have a legal framework to see how best special drawing rights could be properly utilized. So these are just a few of the issues that we hope you could be able to at least look into and see how well we can address some during this time on debt. Thank you. These are just a few of the issues that we hope we could be able to at least look into and see how well.
Thank you, Penny Powers, for that input on debt. You have scratched quite a number of things. I'm just comforted by the presence of the IMF. They will help me not to drink a lot of water to answer those things. I'm not seeing Moses Kagwa in the house, but I can say one of the things he would have said is that now government is doing its best to make sure there are no commitment charges on all future loans. And already they have made some progress on that. I'm very sure Moses Kagwa, Director Economic Affairs, would have said that, or he will if he comes in at that point. Now, James Muhindo, all your time has been taken by the ladies, so I'm just going to lend you part of my time, but your time is over. So you're only going to use my time. You have the floor.
All protocol observed, good morning. I'm going to continue the conversation that the ladies have made, but my focus is on the extractive industry, that is oil, gas, and mining. Our first issue is the slow domestication of the Africa mining vision. Member states in the region have not taken on or adopted provisions and recommendations of the Africa mining vision as it would be expected. This vision proposes, among other things, countries changing their policies and licensing and adopting innovative fiscal regimes that help to maximize revenue from extractives. And while Uganda is taking some steps in that direction, it seems sometimes we take one and step back two with the recent passing of the East African Crude Oil Pipeline Special Provisions Bill. Some of the incentives and provisions in that bill were a rollback of what the Africa Mining Vision proposes. We are lucky to be looking at the Mining and Minerals Bill at the moment, and we hope it will have more progressive provisions. So on this, we recommend that the ESC makes declarations or commitments to ensure that countries domesticate the Africa Mining Vision. And we also propose that in passing laws for the extractive industry, Yala will be considering some of the recommendations and provisions in the Africa Mining Vision, as well as harmonization of mineral policies in the region. The second area where we think, if addressed, we would contribute to domestic revenue mobilization from extractives is joining the Extractives Industry Transparency Initiative. The reason a lot of revenue is lost in the extractive industry is secrecy around the sector, where the terms upon which companies operate are not known, the revenues generated from these companies are not known. As a result of that, you find a lot of revenue being lost, and to that end, only a few are able to push back and see that revenue is, countries get optimum revenue from extractive. So we believe if more countries can join the path that Uganda has started on in joining EITI, and I think Kenya is not far behind Uganda in joining EITI, we can ensure transparency and accountability in the sector, and by that we'll be able to track revenues and increase revenues generated from the sector. That's why we recommend that the ESC Council of Ministers and also Yala should encourage states to join the Extractives Industry Transparency Initiative so as to curb the secrecy that costs us revenue. The third is lack of specialized capacity of tax administration. The extractive industry is sophisticated, and while our tax administrators may have knowledge in other sectors, when subjected to the extractive industry, some of the rules that work in taxing other sectors may not apply or are abused by extractive industries, because most of the companies involved in mining, oil extraction are companies that have been at this for decades and have learned how to maximize profits for their shareholders. So subjecting them to ordinary rules, more often than not, those rules are beaten. So we propose that tax administrators need to have specialized capacities, have units that can authoritatively tax and trace revenue in the sector so that every penny is taxed. I can liken this to the example which many on social media might have had at the beginning of school terms, where children who have parents that are not as educated ask them to send money for Bunsen burners or photosynthesis because they don't know what these things mean. It's the same game that companies in the extractive industries play with tax administrators, where they are telling you this is what it is when it's actually not what it is. And the experience Tanzania had 2 years ago with Acacia Mining, where President Magufuli, may he rest in peace, looked at the company in the eyes and said, for 20 years, you've been defrauding us this much. These are the billions it amounts to. Pay before you get your license renewed. Ultimately, some of the money was recovered, but for over 2 decades, this company had been fleecing Tanzania. So if we can have tax administrators better understand this, then we'll be able to optimize revenues generated from the extractive industry. And I think with the ESC having the customs union, then even at regional level, this capacity must be built for the officers or technocrats to be able to understand how to tax extractives optimally. Number 4, which is second last, is revision of tax treaties and the generous tax incentives. And I think this is something that my colleagues had already emphasized, but it's something that we as a region need to look into, where we are competing in a very unhealthy way that is being exploited by companies. A case in point is most of the companies operating in the extractive industry here in Uganda and elsewhere in the region are all domesticated in tax havens, all countries with which host countries have double taxation agreements, meaning without these agreements or with better negotiated agreements, we may get a little more than we are getting, and that's why it's important for us to look into this matter. And also still in terms of treaties and tax incentives, there was a case last year when, during the revision of the Income Tax Act, when the minister proposed revision of export levy on gold, and both processed and unprocessed. And for 2 or 3 months, we stopped registering gold export in Uganda, which had grown to become our major leading export earning. So this showed that there may be a problem with some of the gold we were registering coming from either neighboring countries or our gold being exported through neighboring countries without being captured upon the revision of the tax regime for processed and unprocessed gold. And steps like this only show that if we look closely, we can find the revenues that we are missing out because of tax treaties and other tax incentives that we have given. And finally, which I'll not dwell so much on, is collateralization of minerals or resource-backed loans, where increasingly we are hinging debt on our resources which we have not yet gotten. Ghana is one of the examples to benchmark on what not to do in terms of using your resources as collateral, where you negotiate now and then take the money, but you're not certain of what the value of that mineral is going to be in the next year or 2 or 3. And as a result of that, at the time of exploiting minerals, we've already eaten what we expected to generate from those minerals. So the region needs to come up with a position and a big commitment to find mechanisms of raising revenue, some of which have been proposed, which may not necessarily back these loans with our resources. Otherwise, we eat into our future, and when we get there, there is nothing to eat. Thank you very much. Otherwise, we eat into our future, and when we get there, there is nothing to eat. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James, for sharing my time with yourself and leaving me sufficient time to deal with the panel. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going into the panel. You'll notice, and please don't tell her, we cheated on the First Deputy Prime Minister and took the tea before she came. So the tea break is out. Even everything has been cleared, so don't look forward to that break. We have turned it into a health break. If you need anything to do with your health, that break you can take, but the tea is out. I'm still waiting upon Moses Kagwa. If he turns up, we'll have him. But let me invite the other panelists to take their seats, and we'll move straight into the panel session, which is supposed to run up to around 10 minutes from now. That's when it's supposed to end. But you know, when we began, we shall be able to allow the panelists to make their interventions in this meeting. And we have feedback from online messages that I'll be reading. My panelists, please, Isabella, you choose the best seat for yourself there, since you are the first. Evelyn Akech, you choose the next best seat for yourself, and Right Honorable Kateshumba Dixon, you will take the seat there. Feedback coming in from online, the panelists will say brief things about themselves so that they can contextualize where they are coming from. and what their history is. Please don't include the primary school you went to. It's not very relevant for this discussion, but maybe the secondary school might be and the university, but most importantly where you work, because that's, I think, the reason you are here. People online are saying thank you very much for the recommendations. Harmonization should go in line with digitization. That was Kwizera. Do our ESC governments consult their citizens before contracting debts in order to get views? Honorable Kateshumba is there to make sure the citizens' views are captured. In case you don't consult them, the question is there for you. How are these contracted? So we're going to get into that conversation. The first thing is a blank check to the panelists for the first 2-3 minutes to speak to the subject of the day. I want to believe when you are invited, you prepared at least something that you really wanted to say. Let me begin with the farthest from my point of discussion. Remember, there was a place they used to call the Far East. They complained to the UN. They said, "Where are the center of the earth? Why are we Far East?" But at least here we know who is farthest. You have the floor.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Moderator. My name is Dr. Evelyn Akech. I work with Public Services International, which is a global trade union federation. We represent over 154 countries with over 30 million workers. Now, coming back to the current discussion, I want to look at what are some of the key challenges, especially towards domestic resource mobilization. One of the biggest challenges we're having in East Africa is the absence of voluntary compliance among taxpayers. We know that many of us in this room, if I asked how many of us on annual basis declare voluntarily their income, few of us will actually respond positively. Another issue is that we still currently have weak relationship between the tax policy and national objectives. And if there's a mismatch, definitely even people start questioning, why should I continue paying my taxes? And this impacts on the domestic resource mobilization. As noted by the previous speaker, we still have issues of difficulty with tax administration in terms of the knowledge gap itself, the practice itself, and what is really expected. So those are some of the key challenges that we actually have. Maybe I'll submit at that level.
Thank you very much. Right Honorable.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Dickson Kateshumba. I'm the Member of Parliament for Shema Municipality, and I'm also the Chairman of the Parliamentary Forum on East African Community. Previously, I worked as a Commissioner Customs, as well as the Chairman of the World Customs Organization. I think we have been talking about DRMS with respect to 3 aspects that have been covered here. Tax harmonization within the ESC. Of course, we've touched on the issues of debt and revenue management. And I want to just start by talking about the harmonization in the ESC. Way back, I recall, way back in 2012, it was May. That was the first time that the idea of harmonization was discussed by the sector committee on finance and economic affairs of ESC. And the whole objective of having the harmonization was to ensure that we look at East African community as a single destination for investment. The second objective was to look at eliminating the distortions that could easily hamper the implementation of the Common Market Protocol, as well as the Common Monetary Union. The other third aspect was removing the harmful competition and also allow cross-border trade. Basically, for us to realize the dream. Now, since 2012, now we are in 2022. There is very, very little progress that has been made on the issue of harmonization. I think in 2020, that's when we had the policy, the framework approved by the Ministers of Finance. But since then, I don't think there is any meeting at a technical level that has taken place to deal with the details. And this is a problem we have had in the ESC. When we have big dreams, we know the benefits. Then when we start discussing the minute details, we start breaking apart. What has been the issue? The issue simply is the harmonization dictates that there are some issues of sovereignty that we have to lose. It's a give and take. But we've not been able to, member states have not been able to accept. For example, we are at different levels of industrialization. So along the way, we failed to agree, for example, on common definitions of small and medium enterprise, knowing that in the ESC, 70% of non-agricultural employment is largely in SMEs, but we cannot have a common definition. We have failed to agree on a common rate. And then when it comes to industrialization, now the national interests have come in the way. That's why we have things like Bubu, Buy Uganda, Build Uganda, Buy Kenya, Build Kenya, as opposed to the Buy East Africa, Build East Africa. So the idea of having ESC as a common investment destination, we lose it along the way because of the individual interests. So there's been little progress, and I'm afraid that at this rate, we may not be able to achieve significant progress even in the next 10 years, because the whole aspect now is about market. Let's expand the market. It's fine we are having DRC on board, and little focus on harmonizing the policies. And the wider we become, the more this subject becomes complicated. We get the market, but then the domestic issues become more complicated. In fact, as I conclude on this, if you look at the common instruments we have achieved, like the East African Community Customs Management Act, the Common External Tariff, even those ones, we are having challenges in terms of consistency. Since 2017, there was efforts to review the Common External Tariff. Also there is no progress, serious progress taking place. As a result, different countries are coming up with stages of application every year, year in, year out. And that is distorting the intra and extra trade. And the main reason is protecting national interests. So we need to have a wider look, wider discussion to see that the bigger objectives are not lost in the individual objectives. And I think that's what I can say. I'll be definitely sharing a few other issues as we go along. Thank you.
Madam Isabella, your blank check starts now. Thank you very much. Those two interventions were very useful insights.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. I am a big fan of Seatini's event, so you will see me in these panels over again. So I'm a representative of the International Monetary Fund, and I have spent all of my careers at the IMF in Washington, D.C. I don't think you've heard of my primary school, but it's actually quite curious since, Fred, you're raising it. I attended a primary school for an Italian minority in Croatia, which I think actually it has formed my character. It has contributed to its formation because from the very early years, it put me at the center of ethnic and ideological conflicts of that time. So since you were asking, this is a little bit about it. So on the presentations I have seen today, I've actually learned a lot from them. And you talked about the double taxation and the model treaty and the various MOUs that are being signed for the exchange of information. I heard about tax havens. So I want to encourage you, first of all, in your endeavors. And why I think you need strong encouragement is that we are facing an unfortunate trend, which is a global trend. The push for the integration is less. It's less at all levels, at tax levels, at trade levels. And This is something that has started already prior to the pandemic in some countries, but it has been exacerbated by the pandemic. And the reason is that with the lockdowns, the activity has stalled in all the countries, and we have witnessed very sharp revenue shortfalls, and countries have started turning inwards. And we are increasingly hearing again terms that were buried in the past, such as import substitution, for instance. So what can be done in the meantime? I'm hoping that these trends will be eventually reversed, but what can we do in the meantime? First of all, I think what needs to be done is to sort out the fiscal space. And this is a discussion that links closely to the second part of this seminar, which is prudent debt management, PDM, and it's not parish development model. So prudent debt management is about generating sufficient resources to support integration policies. Tax harmonization, more often than not, means revenue contraction in the short term. It's something that we have to overcome in order to reap gains in the future. And these gains come from increased trade and increased activity, not from the equalization of tax rates. Closely linked to that is the elimination of tax expenditures. I keep coming back to this topic. I'm really sorry about that. But elimination of tax expenditures can create a sizable fiscal space. And this is something that has to be done as a first step internally at the level of the country. We have seen, for instance, the outcomes of one of the most ambitious attempts to harmonize taxes, and this is the WAEMU Union. This is a union that has targeted much higher convergence level than the European Union, which is one of the more integrated union in the world. They have achieved tax harmonization, but the growth of revenue was not what they expected. And this is because in this process, the tax base has been eroded. So the first step is the need for a political commitment to address the expansion in the revenue base in order to be able to reap gains from tax harmonization in the future. Next, non-tariff barriers. In the meantime, as we are working on all of those other tax harmonization steps, there is huge scope for further integration through elimination of non-tariff barriers. Those are typically investment in infrastructure, but also simplification of processes at the custom level, information sharing, better use of technologies in order to unify the countries. And then, perhaps last but not least, thinking about small steps. I'm going to give you just an example of the securities market in Uganda. We increasingly hear from investors that the tax system, the tax treatment of income from securities is extremely complex. It's murky, it's unpredictable. This has so far not harmed Uganda. Investors are still willing to reach into Uganda securities. However, yields are currently very high. What will happen as we undergo the planned fiscal consolidation? Yields will hopefully decrease. And then these kind of tax obstacles will become binding. So if one wants to increase attractiveness for investors and place the securities at the regional level, this is an area where some simplification can be achieved. So think big fiscal space, but also act at the small levels and at the topical levels. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And you see the connection primary schools do matter. They can set the pace for everybody else. And that's the place we really want to spend the tax revenues, to give these young ones a good foundation. Because if we don't do that, you have no idea what we are missing. So this conversation is not just about raising the money but where do you put that money? But we also want to avoid the race to the bottom. I think, Honorable Kateshum, I'm coming back to you. You've raised some interesting things. We are dragging our feet, and I think it has also been raised by Isabella, where people are reverting to individualism. Countries are reverting to individualism. We have seen Toyota saying, I cannot make the money I used to make. Just chips are missing because the chips were being made outside Japan. And now people have said, we must make our own chips. And they are killing their own. So you see a lot of those things. But also there is a worry that as we harmonize, there is loss of the tax base, erosion of the tax base. You were a commissioner in customs and you know what happened to our dishable goods as we got into some of these free ranges. Are we going to race to the bottom? How are we supposed to manage these tricky waters?
I don't think the worry, if you look at the history of trade in the region since the integration effort started, we have actually all gained. The Ugandans were worried, we are going to lose our market to Kenya or where, but if you look at the numbers, there is no country in the ESC that has not gained from working together since the common market came into place. So that should provide sufficient comfort to the population as we push for this agenda. The concern, and IMF has just talked about it, is some of the issues that come in play. For example, the issue of NTBs. You think about this. We have an NTB law, and our colleagues here from Yala, we thank you for your efforts. The law is there, but it's not being implemented. So think about the investments we are making. For example, the effort that is going into the parish development model, if I pick it as an example, that is meant to stimulate production in the country at levels, at parish levels. So imagine, out of that program, if we boost domestic production of, say, eggs in Uganda, and then you must have the market for them. But even your existing products that you are selling across the border is actually being frustrated. And so you will have invested a lot in production successfully, but now you must look at the obstacles along the way. If these NTBs are removed, I believe that certainly everybody will gain in the ESC. It's just that we must look at the big picture. You lose here, you gain here. Because none of us can be sufficient. You'll find that the farmers here in Uganda rely on some inputs from Kenya, and they also have to sell some products in Kenya. So the issue of base revenue loss, I don't think would be an issue if we open up the markets and allow goods to move across the border. The problem is that as a country, as Uganda, we used to be the biggest market for some of our countries in the region. Now, as we moved into industrialization and looked inward, we are producing the things that we used to import, much to the discomfort of some of our partner states. And therefore, if the focus remains on that, then we cannot achieve that. Harmonization, sometimes you wonder whether you can actually be able to have ESC as one destination. And I'd like to encourage our colleagues that we need to pick out the aspects that we can actually harmonize quickly and then move on with them. Because if you look at ESC as one destination, there are many other factors. Usually we are looking at it as a market. If we expand, it's a big market, granted. But the market alone, when an investor is coming in the ESC, is looking at the other issues of security and governance, is looking at the incentives, is looking at the infrastructure, labor and human capital, which vary across the ESC. Those things you cannot easily harmonize unless you arrive at a political federation. So someone will look at what is the environment pertaining in this country, in the other one, if I put my investments, are they safe? etc. So achieving a complete harmonization can happen when we have progressed on political federation. And I think that's where the president has been emphasizing. If we reached that level, then we would not have these problems. But along the way, I want to encourage members, especially Yala members, let's pick out quick wins as we progress. And we have realized those in the customs area. You have a single customs territory that unlocked so many bottlenecks, which was a very good quick win. So even in the area of harmonization, what can we do without worrying about erosion of tax base? Because the numbers show that when we open up and work together, everyone gains. We might gain at different stages, but everybody ultimately will gain.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we can now see where we all are. We really are in this together, and having conversations of this nature will help us to craft a way forward. The MPs have their space to play. They are also meeting challenges, the frustrations, and thank you, Siatina and team, for bringing this into a conversation. Other people would be sitting out there to say, government is not serious. They are not making any move. But now we begin to see that this is the kind of way we need to take it forward. But now remember, there is a private sector out there, really very frustrated. If things began 10 years ago, DTB is not signed, CET not implemented, and yet there is somebody who really packed his bags to come to this region to invest the moment the CET was mentioned. Say, let me go and look for this market. And we are not anywhere. How would we resolve some of these issues? We need to have that conversation coming out. And of course, the governance issues coming out. Evelyn, where you sit, what do you have to add to this conversation? And I'm going to get to the people online. If anybody is managing the online space, I want to pick some questions, 2 from there, and then I'm going to pick some 3 from here as we continue with this conversation with the panel.
Yeah, thank you so much. Now, when we talk about the issue of harmonization, we are not talking about uniformity. And I want to go back to what the Honorable Odongo said. The issue of when we talk about uniformity, when we talk about harmonization, when we talk about areas of agreement, it is not about us having a uniform either tax rate, but agreeing in terms of, okay, if you're going to have a CIT, currently we must actually appreciate the progress made. The corporate income tax currently across all the 5 member states so far is at 30%, including South Sudan. That is already a step towards harmonization. Talk about the issue of VAT. If you look at, talk about Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, okay, and Tanzania, we have 18%, whereas Kenya has 16%. For me, that is already a step towards harmonization, including the issues of withholding tax when it comes to dividends, especially for non-residents. You find that Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania, actually, and Burundi has a similar amount of 15%, even though Rwanda still does better at 10%. Now, we should be talking about how do we enhance our tax base within East Africa. For instance, if you talk about residents of East Africa, when it comes to issues of dividends, we must applaud the steps taken by Rwanda. Currently, if you're a resident of East Africa, you are charged at the same amount of money as Rwandese, at about 5%. That is, for me, is actually already a step. However, coming back to the issue of base erosion, let's appreciate. Even if it is not within, let's not peg it to issue of harmonization, which might make our member states lose some of their base in terms of taxes. Let's look at it from a bigger picture. The base erosion starts with the multinational companies. And I want IMF to actually consent with us here. The current discussions we have at either OECD, where they talk about GLOBE, that is the Global Initiative on Anti-Base Erosion of Taxes, is looking at all these issues here. How do we actually ensure multinational corporations pay their fair share of taxes, including the efforts in terms of having a global minimum tax effort? We know that the G20 had proposed something like about 12.5% or 15%. The question is, even if you look at the parameters that are currently being set at the international level, they do not give us as developing countries the leverage to be able to increase our taxes as we need it. So the ability of East African communities to have an harmonized tax kind of regime only helps us to kind of curb issues of race to the bottom in terms of tax competition, in terms of giving tax incentives that are only detrimental to us. So it is more of a global discussion. Let's peg ourselves as East Africa within the bigger picture of global discussion. Harmonization is one thing that will help us to achieve this. Because if you negotiate, it is quite interesting, Mr. Moderator, that you're willing to sign double tax agreement with countries like Luxembourg, talk about Netherlands, talk about Mauritius. But when it comes to East African ourselves, we are refusing. How much money are we losing to Mauritius? Let's take an example of Umeme. When they went to IPO, that is in 2012, one of the companies that was actually registered to be able to buy shares on IPO was actually registered in Mauritius. And that means as a government, we lost a capital gains. Because if you have a tax agreement with the Mauritius, they cannot charge you on capital tax gain. So who is losing money? So if you're willing to negotiate with people outside the East African community, why can't we start with our own? That is my submission.
Thank you very much. There are quite a number of things that need to be done before we can push for the money. If we do not want to lose out on a number of things, because revenues can disappear. I think Evelyn asked us about our voluntary compliance. And I know even when we have voluntarily complied, we underdeclare. So what are the issues here? What are the concerns? And sometimes you need a big brother to push you, or a big sister, or a neighbor, or a partner. And Isabella here represents the partners. And I remember when COVID struck, IMF gave us some good money, 491.5 million. And it came with some kind of push that there must be undertaking of independent audits of some of the COVID resources. And I think Auditor General really went overdrive and did some of the things. But also a requirement that large procurements must be declared published on the government website. There were also things to do with the reporting, transparency really of how these monies were being spent. Some people are wondering, shouldn't this become the norm, that every time every other donor gives us these resources, including our own domestically raised resources? What measures do we need to put in place to really make sure transparency and governance on these resources we pick from out there, which is the assumption that they will come here and amplify our own domestic capacity to raise our own revenue? What do we need to do to make sure that is actualized?
I guess that question is addressed to me. Well, I can reassure you first that those commitments that were taken in the context of the disbursement of the rapid credit facility have been indeed met. If you look now at the website of the Ministry of Finance, you can see the cash releases of COVID-19 expenditures for the first 2 quarters of last year. We have recently seen a second special audit of COVID-19 spending by the Auditor General, which was discussed in the Parliament, that will be published shortly. The contracts, the summaries of the contracts have been also published, and the government is going even further into expanding its intention to collect beneficial ownership information in contract from the COVID-19 contracts to all of the contracts. So this is something that we welcome. I don't believe that the information is what is missing here. We do have budget execution reports for the entire year, not just for the COVID-19 expenditures. The Auditor General performs audit on all expenditures as well. And this information is publicly available. That report is something that has been raised as well. Uganda is one of the most transparent countries when it comes to publishing that information. There is a contingent liabilities report, SOEs reports, quarterly debt statistics. Maybe the issue is on granularity of some of this information, but the information is there. I believe what is the next stage is the follow-up. What do we do with all of this? How do we make sure that next year the Auditor General does not come up with the same exact remarks? One area where we think a way this can be addressed is through Treasury instructions of how to address some of these weaknesses. So I think that is probably a step in the immediate future, and otherwise having this kind of debates, raising questions to look for the solutions. Thanks.
Questions from you? I see a hand there, the first one. I see a second one. And anything online? Do I see hands online? I see a third one. I will first take those three. And if there is any hand online, whoever is managing the online, plus the Twitter handles that are out there, I'll be comfortable to pick the people in cyberspace. Our microphone should be moving around. I think we have a mobile microphone for him. Do we have a mobile microphone? Please pass it on to him and make sure you have a sanitizer ready to prevent the insects or the viruses from moving across. They may cost us more money dealing with them. Right on this table. Where was the second hand? Yes, it was here. There is a fourth hand emerging. No problem. When I get to number 7, I'll stop. You know the reasons why. Primary stops at number 7. That's number 5. You have 1 minute.
Thank you so much. My name is Michael, Senteza Michael from Uganda Small Scale Industries Association. Just one or two things I wanted to inquire. Now, first of all, I appreciate Ms. Evelyn Akech, who mentioned something I was about to ask, that harmonization doesn't mean duplication. And from the person who spoke, I think it was Mr. George who spoke earlier, Odong, was about the effort of integration and harmonization. And the question is, why are we trying to annex more people on board when we've kind of failed to understand that, to agree on the basic elements of harmonization, who we are, why don't we do this? Number 2, why don't we look at East African solutions from the local point of view? Because most of the things we're trying to implement are at a global level, they are good, but the countries we are trying to benchmark on have been through 100 years of development, and we're trying to do what they're trying to fix now instead of fixing from our own angle. Then I think there was something about import substitution. I believe that as a person from the industrialist element, if you do not have a certain amount of development in your industrialization, you'll not have balance of trade. So you'll have a situation where, for example, Uganda versus China, we don't even export even 5% of what we import from China. Now, eventually that's going to become a problem because we need the cash to get to them. And obviously we end up in the issues of the forex management, the debt management, and so on. And then finally, somebody mentioned about something to do with the minerals. We need to find a way of dealing with accountability. Because, East Africa is very mineral rich. We need to admit that. The question that we need to ask is why aren't we able to collect from this? Typical example, I just read a small article about a company. We were trying to give a deal to build a refinery because they're going to invest $20 million. Now, the irony is that as Uganda, we can afford, even from the private sector collaboration, to collect 72 billion shillings to set up something. Now, obviously, when we talk about foreign companies, I'm not really against the foreign direct investment, but we need to bear in mind that we will end up with repatriation of cash, of money that goes out. Again, that creates another problem. So I need to find out why can't we engage from our local level, look at zoning where we say Uganda produces this better, Kenya produces this better, Tanzania produces this better, instead of trying to replicate and fight over markets. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Number 2 is here. The questions may not have been addressed to any particular person, but you pick out what you want to respond to. You have your 1 minute starts now.
Thanks a lot. My first comment, I'm Henry Bazira and I work with the Water Governance Institute, a member of the Tax Justice Alliance. I want to begin by saying that we need a strong EAC for us to raise capital. The EAC that we see is still weak. We cannot raise capital domestically, even within the region. So if we're going to raise capital within the region, we need to see a strong EAC. And they mentioned that we should be given the space or the leverage to be able to get financing. No one is going to give you the space or the leverage. You must take that space for yourself. What I'm seeing is we are taking debt, a situation where somebody says, take this debt, it's like giving you a rope, put it around your neck, and then he asks you to hang yourself slowly. This debt is being driven. We're also seeing a situation where debt is driven by corruption. And that's what is driving the debt appetite that we are seeing in the region. If only debt was being taken to acquire capital, technology, and skills, that would enhance our production, our ability to exploit our natural resources, that would be very good debt. But many times the debt is taken. We have cases where debt has been taken even before projects have been designed, and then the debt is sitting idle. So, and then this push for integration seems to be at the EAC level. The international politic does not seem to want to see integration. My colleagues at the IMF will definitely be recommending that we focus on foreign direct investment instead of focusing on domestic direct investment. And somebody asked me, if you're pushing for domestic direct investment, where are we going to get the capital? I wish the debt was the one financing that domestic direct investment. Let's rationalize FDI and the way we are doing contracts so that we have less of FDI and more of DDI. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We had a conversation earlier, what do we call FDI? What is foreign? Why should they remain foreign when they have really decided to come and establish a factory here? When do they become national really? And I like a lot from the conversation of Bank of Uganda. As far as Bank of Uganda is concerned, there are no foreign banks in Uganda. It is you people who call them foreign. Stanbic is Stanbic Bank Uganda Limited. It's managed by the laws of Uganda, by the regulations of Uganda, and does not bring anything that claims and says, this came from Standard Bank South Africa. Even if you receive an instruction from there, if it is not compliant with the Ugandan laws and regulations, take it back. So why do we still have this terminology of FDI? If somebody has really decided to come here, has bought land, registered the company, why do we still call them foreign? Anyway, this is, sometimes words can really be misleading and make us lose the conversation. So you have a whole policy that takes care of foreign investors and domestic investors. When do we resolve these issues? We need to think through. My number 3 was over this side. Where is the mic? So sometimes terminologies are created. When is a genocide, a homicide, I don't know what kind of things. The one who sets the narrative can really mislead you and say this was a Holocaust, this was a genocide, this was murder, mass or rape.
Thank you. My name is Stella Nyapendi Chombo from Uganda Revenue Authority. I serve as an Assistant Commissioner in charge of policy and rulings in the Border Affairs and Legal Services Department. Mine is a comment, and it comes from the presentation from Mr. John Muhindo and a bit of what Mrs. Evelyn Akech made mention of, and that is in regard to the lack of specialized capacity by the tax administrators. specifically in the collection of revenue from extractives. And for Evelyn, she just made mention of the general lack of capacity and specialization. On that, the comment from me is that as URA, we have had deliberate effort in making sure that we collect, we specialize, and that is evidenced by the fact that we have a unit called the National Resource Management Unit. It was set up in 2009. We have the Petroleum Division. It was set up in 2018. Now, this is geared towards ensuring that we specialize our staff in collecting revenue from extractives. We have made many milestones in that regard, to the extent that it's because of the training that we were able to win the heritage matter. We've had a number of collections in domestically coming from extractives. We as well have a mining section. We have deliberate effort in ensuring that we understand the mining industry, we train in the mining industry, and ensure that our staff are at par with the multinationals when it comes to discussions. We've been as heavily involved in the final investment decision discussions and a number of tax treaty discussions where we are vouching for amendment of the tax treaties to ensure that we include provisions on extractives. All that is geared towards ensuring that as URA, we know what we are doing. We may not be there, but we are heading there. So we know that without the knowledge, we cannot collect. So we are deliberate on that. I just wanted to clarify on that. The second aspect that I want to comment on is the issue of voluntary compliance. Evelyn mentioned that there is lack of capacity. There is lack of voluntary compliance in Uganda as a whole. And the moderator as well said that people under-declare. That is true. True because in Uganda we have a self-assessment regime that it gives you a chance to declare and pay the taxes that you think are due to you. Now, we are not getting where we are. One, because of a number of reasons. We have an informal sector that is growing. We have people who are not willing to pay. What is URA doing? On this, again, URA has been deliberate in putting in place programs and initiatives to ensure that people comply. Among them, I'll mention the electronic fiscal invoicing solution, the digital tax stamps. Those are all initiatives to ensure that people are able to comply and that we are able to collect. Resultantly, we are seeing the tax register growing, and we know that by next year we shall have a different story in terms of what we are collecting and how our register looks, and in terms of compliance. I thank you.
Thank you very much for those additionals to the conversation. They make value. She has ably given us where they are going. Maybe the next thing you'll be telling us is if you need additional support, these people can lobby for you to invest more in those initiatives. We know you need more money to do the investments in the capacity building. You have some constituents here who may want to add to that conversation on your behalf when it comes to that level. Where was my number 4? Your number 5, where's number 4? You have killed number 5, or you have exiled them. I had their passports with me, so they must be somewhere, but possibly across the border. Well, we can go to number 5 in the meantime. Number 4 may have withdrawn. You will be coming in next. 7 is not yet there. 7 will be the man himself.
Thank you very much, moderator.
You have 1 minute.
My name is Moses Wal Goli. I'm MP for Dokolo North. My quick question relates to what's happening worldwide. Most of the industries around the world, especially in the service sector, are aware of challenges they have with regulatory-related issues in governments. And they're working hard to beat those systems. Once when I was trained in Singapore. One of the trainings I was given was how to beat other government systems so that you excel in exports. I'm particularly looking at ICT-related service provision, YouTube, what, you know, all those things where somebody is far away. If you look at all Ugandans in their consumption pattern, they're all glued on their phones. A lot of money is given to whoever is given, who is outside. How are we moving in that direction? It relates to what URA is saying, that they have capacity. But look at that capacity so that we look at resource mobilization. The trend going on will be expenditure, which is so much related to those kind of activities which we do not have direct control over. So what are we doing to check that resource mobilization in the future? Secondly, I would want to agree that at EAC or Uganda, we've done a lot. Most people will say we have not done so much, but we have done a lot. But what we have done, which relates to regulatory issues, how far has it gone to support what I believe in, which is the market, the resource based for you to tax? My personal belief is the biggest thing we should do is to increase the incomes of the persons so that it becomes a base for taxation. What I think that's where we should put a lot of emphasis. I actually do not believe if you increase, like we're now going to DRC, we are actually increasing the market. Because wherever which country you are taking, it has its own market. If you bring Kenya, you bring Uganda, there are people who are supplying. So you are not holding the factor of supply constant when you add DRC and you think your market has increased, because there are suppliers there also. So the whole region should be working on how, for example, Uganda, the 40 million, how much money do they have available for them to spend so that it becomes a focus for us to get our taxes increased. Look at Uganda now, we're doing at 52%, the industries. They are operating at 52%. Even if you bring another investor, it's just going to eat into the 52% operation which they are in. The solution must always be, we must increase the purchasing power of our local persons so that the few who are there can now jumpstart the few industries from 52, at least to go to 90%. So the actions, in my view, for domestic mobilization is less on the regulatory related issues. It is more on increase of persons and their expenditure so that you increase the tax base. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable, for that intervention. The microphone here, I think, is raising a very, very fundamental issue. Many of us know what things we buy from the hawkers and the vendors on the streets. If you don't find them to give you this through the window of your door, some tax is lost. So sometimes we disrupt the last mile that actually brings in the tax revenue. Because who pays the tax? It is that household. If I am poor, I may not pay the tax. And I will share some statistics. The tax register for URA, only about 1,000 companies out of the over 1.5 million pay 70% of the taxes. But that's not to say we don't pay, because MTN, I believe, collects from us and takes it there. But also this morning I was getting some disturbing information that 93% of the bank accounts in Uganda have less than 1 million. We are really a poor population. Eh? It's not about number that the EAC is now 500 million people. When we are poor, really, where was the other hand of the person supposed to give? I want to get back to my panel. These things do matter. So these banks are really struggling to find. The numbers are there, but if 93% have less than 1 million, then I don't know what we are scratching. Are we looking for water out of the stone and we're not called Moses of the Bible? My hands are finished, I guess. I was none. Oh, there is one here. You have 1 minute and then I'll get back to the panel. I hope you have sorted out the issues that you have listened to and you will have the liberty to respond to them in the remaining 10 minutes. Last but not least.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mine is really a dilemma, and I guess it goes to Dixon. and maybe the members of Yala who are here, is just the issue of compliance. What do we do when countries, member states, just don't take the products? I'm a member, my name is Alfred Dakas, I'm a member on the Trade Committee of Parliament. I'm also a member of Parliament for Kaveremaido. We were in Kakira, and we found Kakira stuck with sugar last year, where negotiations had taken place. The number of tons that should go to Kenya per quarter were established. What should go to Tanzania per quarter was established. But just with impunity, those numbers are not going. And you hear clear allegations that Kenyans are importing sugar from Brazil. What does one do? In situations like we have a border closed for years between us and Rwanda, what does one do to establish that compliance? And where we are right now, even as when you talk about Yala, you talk about EAC, it's as if it's a hoax. It's not there when it comes to mounting pressure on member states to comply. So where does one run? Where does the private sector find help? You find huge tons. Kakira had to stop producing and just keep paying workers, but they cannot. The stores are just full. We have been stuck with milk. We are stuck with eggs. We are stuck. The member states choose to buy what they want, even where negotiations have taken place. Where does private sector run? In the current resolve of crisis between us and Rwanda, it is member states that are taking it head on. But where is Yala? Where are we as a community in making sure that those kinds of conflicts are resolved at the institutional level? So, like I said, mine is a dilemma, and I don't know where it all takes us. I thank you.
You've actually left me with a trilemma. I thought I would come to Parliament. And if there's a dilemma in Parliament, then I have a trilemma on my side, and I'm going to send a quadrilemma to somebody else. I can't end this conversation without our second lady right over there. I need to bring this conversation to a close in the next 1 minute, so you have 1 minute, and I get back to my panelists.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Honorable Chair, my name's Mary Mujenyi. I'm one of the 9 in Yala, in the East African Legislative Assembly. Chair, I want to start by thanking the panel and all the presenters before for this very important dialogue. One of the concerns that we members of Yala have been having is an opportunity to sensitize the people of Uganda, particularly the decision makers, about the benefits of the East African community. This happens to be one of those opportunities, and I wish and hope that we could continue to have more of this kind of dialogue in Uganda and also in other partner states. Very, very, very key. There is no better mobilization of resources, domestic resources, than enhancing the benefits of the community. If you look at the treaty and all its components, it's actually about enhancing resources, pulling together in terms of labor, in terms of resources, natural resources, in terms of the market in general, so that we become better. But quite often, I personally think that there is lack of awareness of these benefits. And so I would like to add just quickly that in order to remove the harmful competition, Honorable Kateshumba put it very well by calling it harmful competition. Indeed, the way East Africans are competing can only be harmful to ourselves. And to me, in order to get quick benefits, we need to do more sensitization, retooling, reskilling the decision makers within the community. this kind of group that we have right here, parliamentarians, commissioners in URA, the level that makes decisions that would make a difference in terms of getting the benefits realized. So let's have more of these. In other words, I'm appreciating this dialogue, and I'm calling for more, which will also make it easier for us as members of parliament of Yala who represent you to be able to target and reap better benefits for the partner states. And let it not end in Uganda alone. Let this kind of dialogue by the different organizations that have organized it be present in other partner states. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable. I have one last person here, and then I'll tell you who is actually last. It's going to be you. Please stick to 1 minute.
Thank you, moderator. My name is Richard Obedi. I work as the Executive Director of the Populace Foundation International. It's a civil society organization working in the region. Mine is more of a governance issue. And by the look of things, and then following the keynote address given by Honorable George, I think the Council of Ministers have a lot of influence. And then what does it take, especially to the members of Yala here, what does it take for this treaty to be amended? Because, again, there is contradiction on issues of consensus. Why would one partner state hold the other 5, just because of trivial issues? And again, the reason why I'm calling for this amendment of the treaty itself is, look at the issue of South Sudan. South Sudan killing Kenyan traders and Ugandan traders, at the end of it all, they cannot even be brought to book. Why don't we have minimum benchmark such that below that, you're actually not going to operate? And South Sudan, for instance, should actually be suspended from some of these organs of the community if they cannot meet basic minimum standards. And then this issue of hiding under what we call state sovereignty is actually running away from accountability. And for that matter, can we have order? Can we have benchmark? Can we have standards below that a member state can actually be suspended? Thank you.
Questions going to the panel, and I want to add to the panel things. I think this is for Honorable Kateshumbwa. There is an issue from Moses Kulabako in Kenya, and I think it is related to the issue that has been raised about are we together? We are still independent member countries, where people will hide almost finished products and call them inputs into a production process. Where you used to sit, I know you are familiar with some of these issues of products that come in very close to being finished and somebody is calling it an input. But also there's a conversation on offshore companies. It's still in our space, and are we really there? I think that's the kind of conversation that I'm picking largely from here. Now, for her moving the microphone, I need to convince her to hand over that microphone back, but the only way to convince her is to allow her 2 minutes to say what she needs to say. About debt, let's not forget this thing is about debt. You can raise all your revenues, and then the debt collector comes. Even before you pay your RA, you have no money left. How do you offer services? Make an intervention on debt.
So I believe that from how Dr. Muhumza has put it, there's a strong linkage between how we utilize our debt, but more especially how we mobilize resources, and seeing to exactly how best members of parliament who are in this room, as well as also Yala MPs, how best can we be able to use the chances, the opportunity in the role that we play in being able to approve the right loans that actually do intend to meet the purposes for improving livelihoods, but also where we can be able to see a return in investment in the projects that are actually being approved. So I feel there is much more that needs to be discussed on opening it up to not only how debt has been an issue, but also as countries, how best we manage our physical issues when it comes to supplementary budgets that eat into already budgeted, the national budget itself, that we all know as countries we have to see to make sure that they go into approval. And basically would be having a big challenge with being able to see that citizens do actually receive the right services. So if we're going to talk about anything regarding domestic mobilization, would be best in ensuring that we have better financing strategies, and by improving our DRM collections, especially with the challenges that we've had during this COVID time with shortfalls in revenue, and this has been cross-cutting for other countries, how best can we be able to see that we can mitigate as ESC countries to see our deficits are actually not exceeding, our deficits are not exceeding how much allocations would want to actually be able to channel to some of those social sectors that we should be able to target. So that's my main issue for how we can maybe look at it also, to brainstorm and also look at it at ESC level as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that input, and on that I will add some requests that Isabella will speak to tracking of debt. Quite often people just throw out the debt to GDP ratio, but there are many other ratios that we need to be really following. Because I was seeing this morning people saying Japan is the most indebted country. So does it mean Uganda below 50% of GDP is better than Japan? The IMF really supports us in coming out with the technical computation of debt sustainability, and maybe that's something you will want to speak to when your slot comes through. Honorable Dixon, I'll begin with you. Each one of us is going to have 3 minutes as we wind up this panel conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll try to condense my responses in 3 minutes for the questions. I wanted to pick up on about 6 issues. The first one, why are next more people on board if we are having challenges? We all have to know that quantity comes before quality. It is better we have a bigger ESC and then we discuss the challenges within, because there are opportunities that come. And I want to say that despite the current challenges, there are very many areas of cooperation that we actually have, and having DRC on board is very, very critical. Import substitution, the reason why we are having a lot of pressure on import substitution is the emergence of manufacturing. And why manufacturing? Because of the pressure of jobs. So the politicians here, you know our biggest issue is jobs. So you'd like to see as many industries as possible. Currently, I think the total industries in Uganda, over 5,000, employ about 1 million or so people. Compare public service jobs, about 300,000. So the more industries we have, the better for our people. However, when they come, now, you now have to protect those industries against, the imports that come in, especially from outside ESC, and that's where import substitution comes in. If you are producing these products here, how do you leave yourself so vulnerable? But within the rules of the World Trade Organization. On the issue of minerals, I appreciate the issue. I want to tell members here that immediately after finishing the East African crude pipeline bill, we have embarked on the minerals bill. And I think very soon we are going to pass it. We have given ourselves targets. I sit on the Committee of Natural Resources and Budget. And that bill, when it comes into law, is going to unlock so many opportunities in the mining sector. And I believe that they will drive a lot of investments, both for the local people, but also for the foreign investors. The issue of debt, the lady talked about it. You see, the debt is arising simply because as a country we don't have sufficient revenues, and yet we have needs. Now, a lot of debt is going into infrastructure. However, if you look at our structure of the budget, 60% is going into recurrent expenditure. Then you have about 18% which is going into debt repayments. and then you are left with about 22% for productive expenditure. And that is where I think the concerns are. If we get this money, are we investing it in productive sectors that it can generate more money? And if we do that, I think that we would not be worried about debt, because there is no country in the world which is not operating on debt. Very, very few. In fact, bigger debt. So you need roads, you need infrastructure, you need to improve the quality of social services, and that you can, if you want to slow down and perhaps have this in many years when you have more revenue, that is the other option. But the pressure on the population to have these services leads government to borrowing. All the MPs here, when we start talking about roads, everybody wants a road in his constituency, tarmacked. Where do you get the money? It must come from either the revenue or the borrowing. So the main issue is us holding government accountable to make sure that the debt is acquired, timely implementation of the projects, and the projects that are productive. On the issue of the ICT-related services, a very, very interesting question that someone raised. My friend Moses, how do we benefit? You know, the situation we are in as developing countries, sometimes the international trade rules don't favor us. Currently, there is a moratorium, WTO moratorium, on non-taxation of intangibles. And intangibles, including that, all these technologies that we are all proud about. And unfortunately, because Africa, we are not innovating, everything that happens there, we acquire. If you go to China, Japan, they have their own, WeChat, all these locally innovated solutions. And government can superintend over them. It can create policies to enable them, but also maybe benefit from taxation. But here, in Africa, all the solutions, we acquire whatever we have. So it's a challenge for us as young people. Can we start? Someone comes up with Uber, we take it on. Someone who has invented something, we despise it locally. So maybe it is a challenge on us. But I think there are opportunities in the e-commerce where we can have some look on the side of policy to enable URA tap into it. Finally, second last, the issue of the market. I want to say this to the members here. As much as we are targeting the regional market and international market, the most guaranteed market, the primary market, is the internal market. That even if the borders are closed, the internal market will always be what? There. So, I agree with Moses, the increasing purchasing power of the people will lead to the growth of the internal market. And that is where we are saying government invest in, say, like parish model. Once you have people, they have earned money, they will drink more soda, they will drink more beer, and you will get money. But if they don't have money to drink, to spend, you will not collect excise duty. So it goes back into the issue of how do we deal with the issue of poverty, investing in the people to make sure that they grow up. These are the people who will support the industries. Industries, if they grow, produce, but then the purchasing power is low, then the internal market is crippled. So we must work on the product. That is the only biggest guarantee source of domestic revenue mobilization, because it will lead to increased sales and URA will tax. And then we look at the regional market with a lot of efforts that we need to do, more engagements, bilaterally, regionally, but also, I also firmly believe that we should implement these laws, even where there is reciprocity, principles of reciprocity. We should not be shy, because that's the language internationally. That's how China and the US managed to balance. So sometimes I think in the region, we are afraid of setting a fire on the forest a little bit, but I think we can try and explore. And I think the final thing is to say, are we still together? I think, yes, we are still together. As much as we disagree on some of these issues, I think deep down within our countries, as ESC, everybody knows that we need each other. So because of that, we cannot break apart. But it is a process, and we should not be tired of talking. And as members of parliament, parliamentary forum members who are here, and others, we shall continue to play our role, support, push the integration agenda, so that our people can be able to exchange. We are happy with the recent developments. The border is open. Let us see. But if we can unlock these NTBs with more negotiations, more engagements, I think the East African community is a big opportunity for us to raise sufficiency in revenue. Thank you.
A very good conversation. You don't want to walk into a fishing pond where there are no fish. So even as we talk about revenue mobilization, we need to talk about incomes. How do we make sure the people in Kabale, in Tungam and whatever can easily sell their goods wherever? The people in Guru can sell goods to Sudan. The people in Kaberamaido can actually sell their goods to Kenya and then come and buy Ugandan goods. And then we can pick up some revenues. Evelyn, you have your 3 minutes starting now.
Yeah, thank you so much. A lot has been said in terms of increasing domestic resource mobilization. Maybe I'll just add one thing in terms of digital taxation. We currently know that there's a number of efforts, both at global level, but sometimes it is limited. Because, for example, if you look at the OECD model, that is BEPS number 1, they talk about taxing the digital companies, but based not on currently, the current model is physical presence. That is why you actually determine whether it is a residence company or not. There's that proposal that we should shift from physical presence to economic presence. So for instance, if you look at how much money is spent on Yahoo or Facebook, the government is able to get to know how many of the users come from Uganda. Are we able to require either Google or Yahoo platform to pay back some of the taxes on that? But that is an uphill task, because as IMF will tell you, it is easier for France and US to exchange information because they hold the database. They actually hold the server. But if Uganda went to Yahoo to ask for the same information, will not be given. So that is an area IMF and World Bank and other international organizations should actually come handy to enable us increase our tax base. I will focus on the issue of debt. One of the things we need to actually ask is the issue of debt cancellation, first of all. There's been a number of efforts in terms of debt cancellation, but I know in the last 2 years, IMF actually did more of restructuring. Restructuring of debt does not actually elevate the burden of debt. Our prayer is that IMF should consider, as has been proposed from a number of forums, to cancel the debts of about 77 least developed countries in the economy, including some of them which are found within East Africa. Another proposal that let's get Parliament actively involved in terms of approval of the loans, because that is going to give an oversight. We appreciate that Uganda has made strides in terms of making public the debts they receive. But there's a difference between public dissemination information and value for money. Let's have clear use of value for money, because that is going to be critical in terms of debt management. And finally, there should also be, we should ensure full transparency in terms of procurement and management of the borrowed funds. Let's go more for concessional loans, unlike non-concessional loans. We prefer going to China. China, with due respect, their terms look to be good on the soft, at the face value, but after signing the contract, you find yourself actually giving your strategic assets as collateral. We want to avoid IMF and World Bank because their procedure is actually long, but by the end of the day, their loans are quite cheap and transparent, unlike China. So let's really have that, where do you want to go? Transparency or corruption? I love what somebody said. Many of us are actually becoming indebted because there's kitu kidogo, kickback, especially when it comes to private loans. Let's really be sure where do you want to go in terms of value for money. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll finally come to Isabella.
Thanks. I'm always in charge of the debt question. Thank you for that. That makes me think that actually Ugandans are very strict with themselves when it comes to that. And it is important to keep asking this question about debt, stock, debt sustainability, but we have to understand in which context this last increase in debt that is worrying you so much, because it's approaching the Convergence criteria, Charter of Fiscal Responsibility, in which context it increased. We have gone through 2 years of deceleration in growth. This happened due to the lockdowns that, as we have heard, mandated new expenditures for health, but also generated huge shortfalls in revenues. And this happened across all the countries. So what has Uganda done? The international financial institutions have made available cheap financing. Uganda has used that financing. Some expenditures, non-priority expenditures, had to be curtailed. This was absolutely necessary. This is the best outcome one could have hoped for. The alternative would have been further cuts in spending, which would have undermined growth, borrowing maybe elsewhere at non-concessional terms. The outcome we have today is absolutely the best one. How to exit from this situation in which we had unfortunately have to break some fiscal rules in the context. So there is no magic solution, but I have to tell you, since Fred is asking me about the various indicators for looking at that. Yes, we look at the debt to GDP ratio. We looked at the debt service to revenue ratio. It's telling us how much we can leverage our resources to pay their service. We look at the debt service to export ratio, which is giving us an indication of how much foreign exchange we have to pay for foreign debt. But ultimately, the very secret and most important is what we call R minus G. And R is the real interest rate at which a country is borrowing. G is the growth rate. If your growth rate is higher than the real interest rate at which you are borrowing, the debt is sustainable. The question is how to get R minus G to a negative number. How to get, these two things are linked actually, because R depends on the country's creditworthiness. And the creditworthiness is at the same time linked to the policies that can ensure that growth remains strong and that there are safeguards in place in case of shocks. The Honorable has talked about innovation, for instance. It's a key ingredient in ensuring long-term growth. So when we talk about the debt GDP, we have to put it in this context of revenue mobilization, in which we have been talking about, sound policies, and finally, reliance on its means. On the debt cancellation, I told many times, we see Uganda's debt as sustainable. The risk of debt distress is moderate after a sharp increase due to the lockdowns. But the debt cancellation we don't see it as needed. And it does not necessarily bring about good incentives. We have to be able to find ourselves 10 years from now and not having to ask about debt cancellation again. So at the same time, these policies are extremely difficult to achieve. We have witnessed how difficult was the debt suspension initiative, the DSSI. Uganda tried to benefit from it, but it actually never managed because it's just cumbersome. And that is because debt today is not what it was in the 90s when we had the HIPC initiative. Debt is fragmented. Debt is owned by individuals, by investors, by banks, and they respond to their shareholders. It is very difficult for multilateral institutions to tell Stanbic to cancel Uganda's debt or some country. So we have to really think about how the resources that are borrowed are used. How to use them in order to improve that G. And how to use them to lower the borrowing cost. Non-concessional borrowing is certainly, pursuit of that is certainly the right answer. Reforms to strengthen the growth potential go hand in hand with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please help me and join me to give thanks to our panel for their useful insights. You may resume your seats. We really appreciate that input. A number of quick things that debt has many aspects to it. You don't just compare the other people's debt size with yours, because debt has a structure. Some countries have debt of 30 years and above. Uganda's debt begins with 90 days. We call them treasury bills. 90 days. And also you want to talk about terms. Did you borrow at 1%? Did you borrow at 15%? Those kinds of things come into the picture, and I think that has been clarified. But also, talking about debt, that's not the only hemorrhage on our revenues. There is corruption. We cannot live without reminding ourselves of that. It is also a big hole on the public resource. We don't want to raise our money and the corrupt people put it to private use. But also, you possibly have seen in social media court awards. We just lost a big case, Bank of Uganda versus a seat of others. I'm sure that is also headed for our tax revenues. So some of these things need to be put into context, that they are all really targeting the revenue space that we want to raise. So while we have a conversation on how do we mobilize more domestic resources, regional resources for development, we should not forget that other side of where is the money going. That should also be a conversation, and I think Siatini will also allow us one day to discuss the other side of this conversation that we need to have. I want to appreciate everybody who has been with us. We started 2 hours late, but we are just about 30 minutes overboard. So I want to ask you to clap for yourselves for really gaining that much time. 1.5 hours is what football takes. So you have really spared time to watch an entire football game to its conclusion. And in order to make sure you go and watch that game, I want to invite Honorable Susan Nakawiki to come and give us our closing remarks for the day. Honorable, you're welcome.
Once again, my name is Susan Nakauchi. On behalf of the East African Legislative Assembly, I want to thank all of you, particularly Siatini and other development partners. I want to thank all our presenters, the panelists, the members of parliament present, the civil society, the media. Thank you so much. This has been a very informative dialogue, especially on our part as members of the East African Legislative Assembly. I've had a number of concerns coming from the different discussants. I'll just comment on a few. I know there are many and we are time barred, so I'll just pick very few, especially those ones I've had everyone complaining about from the back where I was seated. One is the issue of the treaty amendment. The EAC treaty is undergoing that process of amendment. The only unfortunate bit is that the process has taken forever. A committee was established. They've been going from partner state to the other, collecting views on the provisions that need urgent amendment. It was also done with the Assembly, the East African Legislative Assembly. We gave in our views, but it has taken more than 5 years. So that slow pace is becoming a big problem. Another discussant talked about suspension of those partner states that are not complying with the treaty obligations. honestly speaking, this is a challenge. The treaty, the way it is, addresses that. Article 143 of the Treaty for the Establishment of the East African Community makes provision for sanctions. The only problem is implementation of that provision, because it says that sanctioning is supposed to be done by the summit on recommendation of the Council of Ministers. I've never seen a body that is too political in EAC like the Council of Ministers. This comprises of not only the ministers of EAC, but also ministers of finance, attorneys general, permanent secretaries. I mean, it's a big group of politicians. And the challenge also is that decision-making, as my brother Jojo Dong said, is by consensus. Where do politicians ever agree? 100%. So even if the summit had the goodwill to implement that Article 143, it will never see the light of the day in summit, because it has to be, first of all, agreed upon by the Council of Ministers. So if you want to penalize, for example, South Sudan for non-remittance of their funds, their contributions, what will happen? The team from South Sudan will just withdraw from the meeting. They go away, they take some tea. So once they are not there in that meeting, the meeting cannot take place. They can never resolve on anything. So, and then it's the council that feeds the summit. The agenda of the summit comes from the Council of Ministers. They have to agree 100% before it goes there. That means the presidents will never know that there is a country that needs to be penalized. And that's a challenge. So maybe that process will need to be worked upon. And then my other colleague also talked about the issue of zoning. I agree 100%. The Republic of Rwanda had come up with an assembling plant for Volkswagen, but we all know their population is very small, 12 million people. Now, I'm reliably informed they are closing shop because they don't have the market for those vehicles that are being assembled in Rwanda. So they have to close shop and go back. So supposing all ESC partner states were buying vehicles from Rwanda, would the shop have closed? We'll be supporting each other. We have quality chemicals here in Uganda. We produce the best anti-malarial drugs and ARVs. But all our neighbors in ESC buy the drugs from India and other countries. We are so close here, but maybe because of the procurement laws, whereby you go with the lowest in terms of pricing, and we don't have so many incentives here to make our drugs very cheap, they go elsewhere. Otherwise, if we're all buying from Uganda, quality chemicals will be flourishing. So it's still a challenge. I know we've had challenges as EAC. You talk about this imported sugar. That has been a song in EAC. The milk, Uganda, we have the best milk in the region, but it always gets stuck at the border. We have the poultry, we have a lot of produce that is supposed to come from Uganda to other partner states. But let's not forget, there are always cartels. In any government, there are those cartels. It's not that there is no will from EAC. Actually, with the presidents, there is very big political will. But now, these technocrats in between there, these cartels, what they do, they have their sugar from Brazil. It's very expensive, actually more expensive than the Ugandan sugar. But what happens? They need to make the profit. So what they do, they have to sabotage the sugar from Uganda that is cheap. They create a shortage in Kenya. Then they bring in theirs until it's sold off from the market. They can't open for Ugandan sugar. After theirs is finished, then they would open. Personally, this is not an ESC opinion, but it's my personal opinion. I've seen where these actions are reciprocated, things are resolved very quickly. There was a time when Tanzania blocked beef from Kenya. So what Kenya also did, immediately, they also blocked all produce from Tanzania. The next day they called for the meeting and they resolved the matter. What happens with Rwanda? Once you block any small item from Rwanda, The next day, they also block yours. In Uganda, we are being the saints. They do everything, we keep our borders open. What do you expect? When they close, let's also close. That's my radical thinking. Sorry, my chair, he's more diplomatic than myself. If we do the same, they will immediately wake up. But they stop our sugar, the milk goes bad at the borders, no eggs, the chicken, the traders lose. Blue Band enters here every day, Omo enters here every day. I mean, everything comes in the way they want. How do you expect them to take action? That's why we negotiate for 6 months before an action is taken. As an assembly, we are doing our part. We push from that angle. But more action needs to be taken at the partner state level. Help us, and then we also do our part. I'm not saying yes, he's a saint. We have challenges, but what defines us is not the lack of challenges. It's our ability to make our way through these challenges and then come up triumphantly. I will take special mention of the laws which have been highlighted, the agreements which have not been ratified by partner states. Honestly speaking, as we said, okay, there is a process, especially when we come up with laws. When we come up with laws at EAC level, we pass them at parliamentary level. They are supposed to go to partner states for assent. Now, if a partner state has reservations, what happens is they are supposed to write back to the assembly, giving reasons why they are reluctant to assent to a particular law. But now there are situations, especially with one partner state, I will not be shy to mention it, the United Republic of Tanzania. For them, they'll just keep it safely under lock and key. So you don't know whether they're going to sign. You don't know whether they have reservations, what reservations, because sometimes when they have reservations, you can try to maneuver how to address their fears, and then the law passes. So in situations where there is no feedback, you don't know even what to do. But I'll pledge one thing as an assembly. I'm going to take on all these issues you've raised. Actually, I was already discussing with my brother, Honorable Musamali and Odongia. We were writing small notes. We are already preparing a motion for council to let us know why these agreements have not been ratified. Because usually when we go to that angle, it's like we're pushing them. We push them to act even when they are not ready to act. As an assembly, we are able to do this, and I can guarantee you we shall do this. Approximation of laws, that has been a challenge. As a parliament under the Committee of Legal Rules and Privileges, every year they have an activity, an oversight activity in every partner state, whereby they assess, they even give marks by percentage on how partner states have harmonized and approximated the EAC laws. Our pace is different. Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda, if we were the only 3 countries in this integration, would have achieved a political federation already, because we go at a very fast rate. Burundi, the challenge is they only do things after Tanzania has done them, so they are as slow as Tanzania. But there's that push. We always have time. We meet with council, and we discuss why a few things have not been acted upon, and they act. The other challenge we have, this one I would request the members of parliament from Uganda to help us. Council of Ministers, it's an office, but an office that has so many problems. These ministers are changed every now and then. Every year you find you have a new minister of EAC. Now EAC is so broad with a big agenda. So every time there's a new minister, he's not able to cope, because there's a lot of homework to do. They don't have that time to do the homework. So you end up that when these decisions are taken, the new ministers are not even aware that those decisions were taken by them. There are times when they have disowned resolutions signed by themselves, simply because they were taken when there were other ministers. So if Uganda sends a new minister every year or 2, that means we're beginning from 0. We have, right now, I'm proud to say we have a very able minister for EAC, Right Honorable Rebecca Kadaga. She's very able. But it will break my heart if in the next reshuffle, it's somebody new. It doesn't make sense. So the ministers, I'll guarantee you, they're not aware that this agreement on double taxation even exists. But we are going to wake them up. We inform them things exist. We are having a plenary beginning Monday next week from 14th. So we are going to have this come on the floor of the House, we can guarantee. And then maybe when we have a subsequent meeting, we'll be able to give you a feedback. Otherwise, I thank you so much. This has been very informative. We pledge to work together. The Parliamentary Forum for East African Community Affairs. I'm feeling so proud that you actually have that one. I'm looking forward to interacting with this forum. I know you will help us a great deal. Otherwise, we're doing our part. Help us do this part better. I salute you all.
Thank you very much, Honorable Susan Nakauke, for those remarks. I think we can see the challenges. As civil society, we are going to compile a statement and come to you so that we can have crispy steps on what do we do next. Because when these people gather again, 3 months or 1 year from now, we need to give accountability to say the conversation we had, these were the issues. We agreed to take the next 3 forward concretely, and this is the progress we have made. Because as we can see, there is a window out there. Honorable Kateshumba put it very well. Said, let's first gather the quantity. Then we clean up to get the quality. This is how we harvest millet. This is how we harvest rice. This is how we harvest beans. We are Africans. You bring in everything, then you get the beans out. But by next year, I want to say, whatever we brought in on that day, here is now the threaded and stressed beans and rice. The meal is ready. I want to invite the organizers and thank everybody for bearing with me and with us on this meeting. Your valuable input is really treasured. And when we invite you again, please do not hesitate to join us. You have the floor. Did they know your name? I have no right to speculate.
Thank you, Mr. Fred. Navga Regina once again. I work with Siatini Uganda. Let's clap for the moderator. Thank you once again. We are always humbled that you can make time for our engagements. Before I proceed, I want to invite the civil society representatives here. Youth for Tax Justice Network, ActionAid, Oxfam, Water Governance Institute, Cisco, Oxfam. Some are online, Transparency International Uganda, others are based in Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi. Please step up on the floor. As we summarize, they need to recognize our efforts, that we work as a team, members of the Tax Justice Alliance, Evelyn, yes, Resource Rights Africa. These are just representatives of Tax Justice Alliance. And Siatini, because we host the Tax Justice Alliance, we always mobilize them, and I think I should join the, yeah? I see they're taking a picture. But it's only us. I don't know if we want to take with a few honorables. Fred, you're still moderating. So I wanted members to clap for the team.
Honorable members should find their way in between there. You can punctuate them here and there so that Isabella, the ladies are saying the cameras won't go off without you being part of this.
Okay. Next to Fred. Yeah.
They're able to see us.
Thank you. That's good, right?
If you can't see me, your picture is null and void. Thank you very much, Regina. You're back here. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Honorable George, please come and stand here with me. They said, the organizers, it's so rare to find government and CS, don't mind the height. It's so rare to find government and CSOs coordinating, organizing an event, but we are so humbled that Honorable George was able to, in fact, remind us that we need to meet. He mobilized his team, and we are here. So we are co-organizers. Please put your hands together for Honorable George. We thank you. We can't thank you enough. So he's going to first say his thank you for the members, and I'll conclude. The Yala.
Okay, thank you so much, all of you, for coming. It's not always that you can get this level of attendance at short notice, because I know that for some members of parliament, they were invited just a few days back. But I want to thank you for the commitment. I want to thank the Parliamentary Forum on EAC. I want to thank the committees of parliament that are here. There are many committees that were invited, and they are here. So we want to thank you so much for taking off your busy schedules to come and be part of this dialogue. I know that there is a lot of take-home here. A lot of work has got to be done in our different committees and also at the PIACA level. For these issues to really have meaning, there is a lot of internal conversations that should take place at the political levels, so that we can bring this on the floor of parliament, but also engage with the different sectors of government. I only want one thing, that you members of parliament can hold accountable those that are making decisions on behalf of Ugandans. That is our Yala members, but also at the council level. There are so many strategic decisions that are being taken at council level that require that they come to parliament to account for those decisions. I think that's where the missing link is, and that's why this conversation has many times brought out issues of lack of information in the public about the decisions that are being taken in Arusha. But I think these spaces help us to bridge that gap, and I'm happy that we are doing it, and I'm praying that we continue with this dialogue between us and the civil society organizations, and I want to thank them so immensely for being part of this conversation all the time. We have taken note of the recommendations that have come up from the different civil society players here. We are compiling them, and indeed, as Honorable Susan has said, it's already informing some of the decisions that we are going to take, particularly when we go for this plenary. I want to pledge that as long as, and we have already done it, we have restructured the plenary, and most likely the bill on surveillance, the EAC bill on surveillance, is going to come on the floor of the House in this particular plenary, and want to pledge that we are definitely going to fast track it and have it passed, so that we have a supportive instrument on those matters. Thank you so much, and I pray that we get back here again and can report on what so far has taken place. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Honorable. Good news, he has pledged. We are going to hold him accountable. Yes? Yes. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Isabella, for making time for us. Everyone, private sector, thank you, academia, media, thank you. As we close, I won't forget to thank our partners, Oxfam and Diaconia, who have supported this process. We shall continue the conversation in Uganda, other countries, and it goes on and on. We have a few administrative issues to sort out, but we have a modest facilitation. In case, we hope that our person is already here, and we'll be keeping in touch with you. Thank you, God bless you, and stay safe. Thank you. We also have lunch.
Recording stopped.